And so at this point, it is time for public comment. This is an opportunity for public comment on issues not scheduled for public comment on the meeting agenda. Items that are scheduled for public comment tonight include school year calendars. All other public comment should be given now. If you would please clearly state your name and school attendance area. Limit your comments to 2 minutes. We will be using a timer to help you with that. The board neither endorses nor censors any opinions expressed in public comment. Please keep comments civil and respectful. No comments or applause from the audience, but feel free to wave hands to show support of the speaker. So we'll start with the people on the list, and then if it turns out there's anybody on Zoom, I will ask about that after this list. First up is Doug Crandall.
Hi. So in late May, at the request of 3 rising seniors, I agreed to lead the IHS girls basketball program for the summer. Our since departed AD helped secure afternoon June time. We wore school uniforms and traveled to team camp at Oregon State. I believe the girls had a great experience and I enjoyed coaching them. And then my wife and I tried to move on from basketball, even as the parents and players continued to seek long ago promised answers from the district. In early September, I agreed to take a call from the newly hired coach. I was happy to provide any information that might help the girls and him succeed. To my great surprise, he asked if I wanted to be on his staff. I did not. We just wanted to move on. But because some kids and parents were truly hurting at the time, I eventually told Coach Jurius I'd think about it and we could revisit in a month. Then later in September, the ISD called and asked me to substitute teach. It seemed maybe we'd all moved on from whatever had happened. In October, at the urging of others and having been told the school administration was on board, I agreed to be an assistant. I'd been fully approved as a volunteer coach by the district, specifically at IHS for this school year, even receiving a kind welcome email. This seemed like a chance to heal, and even if slightly embarrassing for me, it would role model humility and service to the kids. It would put them first. Just as the ISD was making a public plea for athletic coaches, I agreed to coach for free in a lesser role. But I've been told the principal felt she had to ask someone above her, and Coach Jurius has been waiting for an answer for over 2 weeks, despite me being an approved volunteer and everyone in the school and program being on board. This is a policy question. What's the volunteer policy? It says once approved, I should coordinate directly with the school. So given that coordination, am I clear to start helping the team on Monday? Or is there actually an additional step? Someone should provide the new coach an answer. I had a tough time with all of this. I'm sure you did too. But I considered the question, what's best for the kids? And ultimately, I decided to help. None of this has been easy. Thank you for listening and have a happy Veterans Day.
Thank you for your input. I see that. No, please no clapping, but I see the wave hands. I'll let people know that. Next up is Ken Sunderland. And if you'd make sure to state your name into the microphone.
It's good to see you all again. My name is Ken Sunderland, and I'm here about IHS girls basketball. The parents and players told you throughout the 9-month process we would move forward once the final decision was rendered, and we did. It's just difficult to be back here again because I thought this was all over with. The new coach you hired showed great wisdom and self-confidence when he decided to ask our previous coach, Doug Crandall, to be his assistant coach. After much thought, Doug agreed to help out as he knew it would benefit the entire program. He was formally approved as an ISD volunteer and coach. And now all of a sudden, days before the season, there's confusion. I don't think you all fully appreciate how difficult it is to find quality coaches. We had one application for a JV coach, and no one has applied to be the freshman team coach. That's despite a personal email request I sent out to 240 members of the local basketball community and their friends. Therefore, it seems likely that our entire freshman class will miss out on the opportunity of playing high school basketball this season. Our new coach has requested Doug to be his assistant, and he has the unanimous support of the entire program with this selection. Can we finally put the girls first and remove any roadblocks? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I see some hands. There you go. I see the hands. All right. Next up is Sarah Porter. Sorry if I said it wrong. Okay.
My name is Sarah Porter. I have a fourth grader at Sunset and a seventh grader at IMS, or at IMS. Since I was here tonight, I'm also part of the newly formed Issaquah Special Education PTSA, and I thought, you know what, I might as well use my 2 minutes. So I just wanted to bring up a couple of issues that we've heard in past board meetings and making sure they're not falling by the wayside. My seventh grader is dyslexic. And his day started at 6 a.m. this morning so that by 6:15, he could get on Zoom with his tutor. We failed Mason without explicit spelling up until this point. So we have to supplement, which we can do. But the reason he has to tutor from 6:15 to 6:50 in the morning is that he catches the bus at 7:15. He catches the bus with the high schoolers in order to be at school by 8:15. So they sit on the bus and they also sit in the school. So our day starts extra early. Now, Mason's a good kid, so I don't think it's a problem, but that's also from the mom. So let's be real. But we know that's hard on the other kids. Mason stays after school because he runs cross country. Season's over, so now he started jazz band. It's fabulous. The big question is basketball's coming up. And Mason, God bless him, is not going to make the varsity team, but will he play in intramurals? He won't be able to if we don't find coaches. And it's come up before that that's a problem. Just wanted to make sure it hasn't lost sight or mind. That's it. That's all I have to say. The other thing I will say is that when we talk about informing the community, we all know there's going to be more ESSER II dollars coming in FY24. So when you start thinking about informing us and letting us know, that would be something that we would love to hear about also. Thank you.
I'm Wendy Giora. Good evening, board members and superintendent. You all have received copies of an important proclamation we ask that you endorse tonight, officially declaring November as Parents' Right in Education Month. I didn't see this on the agenda as requested. The WSSDA, Washington State School Directors Association, stated, parents and families are important stakeholders in their children's education, position 61. I will read the proclamation. Whereas we acknowledge parents are the child's first and foremost educator and have the primary responsibility for the education, care, and training of their children, and whereas education is comprised of a range of activities by which families and communities teach knowledge and skills, including ethical and behavioral norms and traditions. And whereas fairness and equality must be afforded to all students and families in the school district. And whereas public schools need cooperation and support of all parents. And whereas the parent-child relationship shall be honored and supported by teachers, counselors, administrators, and school board members. Therefore, we declare November Parents' Rights in Education Month, affirming the constitutional right of parents to direct the education and upbringing of their children. Will you affirm the importance of parents in the education of their children by adopting this proclamation tonight? Thank you.
My name is Ryan Fleischer. I live in the IVE, IMS, IHS area. I have been the gymnastics coach at Issaquah High School for the last 25 years, head coach for the last 20 years. I just retired last year. Just so you know, I graduated from Issaquah Valley, IMS, IHS. I actually went to preschool at IHS. My mom worked at Pine Lake. She was on the design committee for Pine Lake. She gave over 40 years to this district before passing away. My dad was a teacher at IHS for 30 years and subbed for another 20. So I was raised Issaquah School District. This is what do? You work for the school district. So I coached for Issaquah out of loyalty because it's my district. It's where I wanted to be. I took over for Pat Hatmaker. This is where I wanted to be. But I've been listening to school board meetings because, yes, I am one of those people that still pays attention, even though my kids have graduated. And this coaching shortage just continues to come up. Well, in my retirement and seeking people to take over my position, I actually looked at the website and looked at what comes across when someone applies for a job. And I applied on paper. It was 25 years ago. We didn't have all this. So I don't know if any of you have looked, but when you go to a coaching position, I pulled up the head coaching position at Skyline for gymnastics. Job status, there's nothing. Salary, there's nothing. Salary placement is depending on education, except it's not because there's a salary schedule and no one's ever gotten anything other than what's on the salary schedule. The requirements, there's nothing. Additional information says winter sports season tentative, and it gives a date that's incorrect by over a month. So someone now thinks their salary is being paid for 4 months instead of 3. Benefits, you can click on that and it takes you to a benefits page, which they don't qualify for benefits. So that's a moot point. Then it takes you to a description page, which for the high school head gymnastics coach at Skyline, it takes you to the assistant coach write up. So I did some looking, and when you look at Bellevue, you make one click, it tells you what the salary is, tells you what the position is, tells you everything you would want to know. Also, I encourage you, because I see my lights on, to please look at the salary schedules of school districts around you, because I could leave my position after 25 years of coaching for this district, go become an assistant coach in Bellevue and make $1,200 more a season. So I'm happy to leave these for you.
Thank you very much. If you'd like to leave anything with us, you can just set them right up here on the table. Thank you very much. I see those hands. That was all I had on my list. Is there anybody in the Zoom, or you can just set them here on this table and the right person will grab them? Are there any hands up on the Zoom, Stephen? All right, on the Zoom, we have Shannon, I believe he said. Shannon Mayo. So if you can unmute.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
I can't hear you. Try speaking.
Can you hear me now?
Hold on one more second. We're going to turn up the sound. All right, try again.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can. Thank you very much for your patience with that. And go ahead, make sure you state your name so we get it into the record.
You got it. Hi, School Board and Superintendent Talyek. My name is Shannon Mayo, and I'm a parent in ISD with 2 kids at Endeavor Elementary. And I am also a volunteer with Moms Demand Action, a gun violence prevention group. In light of another tragic shooting at Ingram High School in Seattle this week, I want to again urge ISD to take a few easy steps to keep our schools safer. I want to tell you about an important resolution the Spokane School District just adopted on October 26th. Shockingly, it's the first of its kind in Washington. But before I get into that, I want to be sure we're grounded in the same data. Gun violence is the #1 killer of children and teens in our country. Safe storage of firearms can reduce risk of unintentional firearm injuries up to 85%. Nearly 700 children in the US die by gun suicide each year. And we found that half of adolescent firearm suicides in Washington were carried out using a gun from the home. And finally, 4.6 million children in the US live in a household with at least one loaded unlocked gun. So how could ISD help take our families out of that 4.6 million number I just shared with you? You have the audience, so I urge you to do what Spokane Public Schools did and adopt a resolution promoting gun safety. If they can do this in Spokane, then we can certainly do this here. They are offering a safe gun storage guidelines provided by Be Smart, information on where to obtain gun locks, how to ask others how they're storing guns. I want to urge you to do this, but I want you to take it even one step further. Be the first school district in Western Washington to adopt a resolution promoting gun safety and include information on extreme risk protection orders. These are civil orders in Washington that can restrict individual possession and purchase of a firearm when you worry that someone might be a risk to themselves or others. To give you a sense, if this was a law in Texas, Uvalde may not have happened. Please let me know what we can do to help facilitate this process in Issaquah School District. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your input. And I see hands in the audience. Is there anyone else on Zoom, Stephen? All right, then. That finishes up our public comment time. And now we are on to approval of the consent agenda.
Move the consent agenda be approved.
So hold
No.
on.
Oh, I'm
What-
sorry.
Right, I request that adjusting to new computer, EL1 and EL13 be pulled off onto the regular agenda, please.
Okay, so it's been asked that EL1 and was it EL13? Say it again?
1 and 13.
13, that's what I thought it was. Okay, EL1 and 13 be pulled off and put on the regular agenda. So let's take those out of the consent agenda. So any motion would be approval of the consent agenda as amended with those pulled. And then let's go ahead and put them down maybe after our school year calendar, put them at that place before we do the legislative matters. So we'll move it there. All right, is that okay? All right, all right. So then let's go ahead with a motion for the amended consent agenda.
And move the consent agenda be approved as amended.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to approve the amended consent agenda without EL1 and EL13. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, I hear no opposed. So that is approved and we have moved EL1 and EL13 to later on the agenda. All right. Next up then, okay, any changes to the regular agenda?
Or do we ask about executives?
What would you like to ask?
So I've never had to do this or wanted to do this before, but I really want an executive session that I hadn't planned for to discuss the performance of an employee.
So like on personnel matters?
So I don't know if we do that right now or we do that at the end. I like I said. This,
Right,
you know,
yeah, so it's new to me too. So I think, what you're seeming to ask is to amend the regular agenda. And you could make a motion to amend the agenda to add an exec session on personnel matters. As we go to think about this, do we want to do it now or do we want to do it at the end?
I don't care. That's
We have-
your review.
Director Maraldo,
We have community here, so I'd prefer to put it towards the end.
we can do it at the end if that, okay. So let's go ahead and ask that you have a motion to amend the regular agenda to add an exec session on personnel matters as our new last item.
Can I say so moved or do I need to say?
Is
And
that
I'll-
good enough, Diane?
And I'll second.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded to amend our agenda to add a exec session on personnel matters as our new last item before adjournment. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, so we have that amended. Are we okay, Diane? We got, okay? As I go into it? Okay. Perfect. All right. All right, now I'm just going to take a second to make a note. Okay, got it. All right, now we are on to the next item of the agenda, which is the review of our work study. We had the opportunity to have a work study session on the planning for the 2023-2024 school district budget. We had a good opportunity to hear from our finance and understand the trends in both enrollment and our ending fund balance. And the board was able to have a discussion about the process as we work towards this next year's budget to both, start much earlier to have open discussions about both the impacts of the cuts over the prior 2 years, as well as where are we now with both our budget in relation, are there additional cuts that need to be made? What would those be? What are the potentials? What is more of a menu of things that could be potentially reduced or cut? What would the impact of those be? How else do we cover the things that were being done? Are they things that just we don't need to have anymore because they've sunsetted for whatever reason? Are they being filled in by others and other positions in some way? So we had a good discussion about a little bit more of the process that we'd like to go through as we look at the budget, in our January, February, March, well before the April time. So any other, thoughts, input related to the work study? Director Weaver.
I think you summarized it pretty well. I would just like to thank Martin and Mariah for putting together some of the information that they did to give us a framework for it. And I do appreciate that we're starting this conversation now. I think it's important that this start now and it continues to be sort of at the forefront every month so that people aren't caught unawares that potentially more budget cuts are coming.
Yep. We'll have to get that kind of scheduled in through our next meetings into the early of next year as we go into that. Anyone else? Oh, Director Mullings.
Yes. So for me, I think it was very helpful, as you just said, to have the last few years of information so that we have a bit more history of how both funding and enrollment has been moving. I think that was super clear. I think I was quite pleased with the ability to have some time to talk about maybe some of the challenges of our last round of these conversations, the timeliness to your point, but also the construct of those conversations. And so I'm looking forward to having earlier conversations, but again, in more context, other programs, other funding changes, potentially how changes in one program impact others and not just kind of one item in isolation.
All right, thank you. Director Gallinger?
Can we have this attached to our board agenda under this current topic right now? That would just be helpful. I think this is an important piece. And thank you to the finance team for doing it. So
yeah, so you guys can get that attached, right? Yeah. Yeah, that can be done. Anybody else? All right. Thank you very much for all the work on getting that information out to us. And actually that will be helpful to the community too. All right, next up is a report out on the town hall. I unfortunately was not able to be at the town hall because I had a family matter to attend to. So I will actually turn it over to Director Weaver. If you'd like, sorry, I should have mentioned that to you because you sort of ran it. And then, and even I'm happy to hear from all of you about how the town hall, it was November 2nd at Maywood Middle School Library. So let us know.
I think it was a good town hall. We didn't have a huge turnout. There were maybe 10 people. And there's pros and cons to that. Obviously, you'd like to think you could draw 30 or 40 people, but on the flip side, because there were only 10, I think we answered every question in the room. I think people went away feeling that they had been heard and listened to and got some good information. I had people come up to me afterwards thanking us for doing it. So that felt good. And interestingly, a lot of the questions revolved around special education. That seemed to be, it seems like every town hall kind of coalesces around one issue for whatever reason. And that was this one. But, as I say, I felt like we answered all the questions in the room. People felt heard. And so from that standpoint, I think it was successful. I'd always love to have more people turn up, but maybe that means people are not unhappy about it. I'll throw it out to the rest of you.
I was trying to look for what Harlan sent because I think, did we get the?
The Mentee charts? Yeah.
because I think it's really good for us to have that piece of information. There was a distinct group that was sharing their perspective. So I really appreciated that. And some of them are here today to kind of represent a group of students that we can tend to overlook but actually has been a focus of ours. And we know that ongoing, if we want to see success in our district, if we want to see movement in our in the numbers that we see on our standardized testing, there is a specific group that if we are intentional about our work with them, we will see robust changes in our statistics, and that is our special ed students. So I really appreciated having that. It was almost like we got a chance to meet with the special ed PTSA, which I think is important. And that's our job, is what are our linkages with the community? And that's why we offer them. And there continues to be good work that needs to happen. So we have definitely moved the needle from when my kids entered the school system and both of them received special education services. I do think we've moved the needle on that. And there's continued things that we need to focus in on, and specifically around reading and what do we do for readers that learn differently, and how do we engage in things like universal design for learning, where you teach towards those that you know are struggling. And I think the statistics are around 10% of students have dyslexia. So we should not be surprised that we have students with dyslexia. And if we can engage them in a way that is helping them learn to read, that all students can learn that same way. And so looking at our pedagogy and what can we do to solve, because that is the biggest nut to crack. If we can get kids reading at grade level by the time they're in third grade, when they switch to learning to read, to reading to learn, so much of the other problems that we see in the system around math, science, social studies, language arts, all of that can be really increased and improved if students can read. And I think that needs to be a primary focus to be able to get us on track with our testing scores. So I appreciated the time, and it is a focus of mine as well. So it was a good conversation.
So I'll just go through, I think, a couple of the other topics. Obviously, that was, to your point, I'd say the main thrust of the conversation. I think there were a couple other points that came up around budget transparency. So I always try to publicize the lovely guide to understanding the budget, which is available on the website. And as Harlan said, we can add some of the budget discussion for tonight. I mean, certainly what we talked about is, I think what people want is like a budget simplification, which is actually quite difficult in how schools are funded. But this really is, I think this guide to understanding the budget does a good job of simplifying as much as possible where funding comes from, where it goes to, and how it's being spent. And one part of that conversation, I think it's important to point out what was on the consent agenda is there was a want of more, I guess, layman consumable budget updates. And so we talked about the new format for the budget updates, and that's actually what's in our consent agenda this evening. So you'll see a simplified version, much easier to read. And so I'm just grateful again for the finance department on relooking at how we make that information much more consumable. But, these are really great assets that are available. It does take a little digestion because it is a dense topic, but I think they've done a nice job of simplifying the content into both the guide to understanding the budget and these updated budget updates that we see tonight.
I always appreciate the opportunity to learn and hear more closer to the buildings that I feel like I don't hear, especially not in that part of the district. So hopefully when our superintendent gives us works in progress, we can hear. One of the things we heard was the challenges is the implementation of the 7-period day at Liberty. And we shouldn't be surprised. We have heard from Director Moraldo for years that was going to be a challenge in the Liberty community. So whether it's not tonight, but at some point in the future, it would be great for us to get actually a formal update through your works in progress or somewhere else about how the implementation at Liberty is going and what are things that they're going to adjust for second semester or whatnot. That would just be helpful for us to know. Even the impact to, because one of the biggest concerns were, are they going to have less electives available to them? And then what's impacted like their academic performance. So I think that would just be really helpful. This was a generational change at Liberty High School. And so we also shouldn't be surprised that it came up. And it didn't come up as like this negative, I can't believe you did this. But they brought up good questions that I hadn't thought about because I'm still, as a parent, trying to navigate just a 7th grade day myself, but I don't know any different because that's all I've ever lived this year. So I did, it looks like you want to say something, then I'll go.
Well, I was going to say, and along those lines, we were also asked just to overall about high school homework load and where are we in with that conversation? And I don't want that to get lost. Influence the Choice has a youth board and we basically are going to have to likely dissolve it because we can't get participation because students are choosing, where am I going to spend my time? If I spend an hour with you tonight, that means I'm up an hour later doing homework. And so I think that pressure is really on students now. And I'm just going to say, I think that there's been an impact to resiliency for students through the pandemic. And I just don't think that they have the stamina to do the level of homework that we're asking them to do. So I think that it is a conversation that the board needs to have this year.
I agree. I think that would be a good work study topic to hear about. Sort of, we know the focus has been on alignment for grading practices, but part of our policy was 2-part. It was homework and grading. And so to hear like, what's the time horizon for the homework piece. So, but I want to ask a process question because we added in, we did an audible, they're adding in about communication feedback loop and let the community talk about that. And we led off with that one. What the board felt like was that be valuable moving forward to the next one. And then the second part is do we have another one scheduled?
We don't yet.
Okay. So,
No, it's probably time
Yeah.
to figure out. When we were discussing them before, we went back and forth over how many we should have and what format and where they should be. So now would be the time in calendaring. We could even talk about where do we want the next one and try to narrow down a date. So, yeah.
as busy as we all are, I do
I
find
know.
them hugely valuable.
Yeah. And we have to do it a bit out to be able to find a date that works as best as possible. Yeah.
But what did people think about that as a process question that was asked?
You mean as far as how to do how the feedback loop?
Yeah, do you feel like it was did you get any meaningful feedback from it? Did you find that was valuable for the community? Because one of the parts that as a board, we talk about this continuously through every different venue is we feel like there's just we don't find satisfaction in our current feedback loops that we have, or feel like they're not necessarily closed loops. And so we're just trying to get a community perspective on like, hey, what is it you want to hear? What are your suggestions? So I'm just curious what people find as the value of sort of as we launch into that.
So as far as adding that question and getting that feedback, I thought that was a very good add, and it's one we should keep of what people want to see from a communication perspective. I think the responses probably tell us more that we're doing the right things versus doing things drastically different, right? So I'm just looking at some of the responses, which are about talk to small groups of parents. Well, that was 10 people on a whatever night of the week it was we were on. I don't remember. So that became that sort of small group. So it's like, okay, I think that makes sense. And the town halls have been allowing that. I think there's a lot of energy around the amount of minutes in public input. And so I think it was a good conversation to have that night, and maybe worth restating, the purpose of this meeting as a business meeting for us to get through items that we're sort of legally and procedurally required to do. And so we feel like we get good input in those 2 minutes. So I think that was helpful, but there seems to be a lot of want of more opportunity. I don't know that I think longer than 2 minutes changes that personally, but I think the other thing I was maybe most interested in was this want of hearing what's happening in different parts of the district. So if we were down in the Liberty area and people were wondering about what was happening in this case, in the Issaquah area. And so just being able to share that that's something they could know today, that we have availability for folks to sign up to get that communication from all over the district. And I know we pushed out a fresh communication on that. So I think what I love about the town halls are there's some things that can just be addressed quite quickly because either they exist or can be easily addressed. And so I liked quite a bit adding that moment to pause on how was it that people wanted to communicate. I thought that was helpful.
Yeah, and I would add to that, part of what I thought was good about that, yes, we got feedback from parents, but we were also able to dialogue and sort of explain why we do some of the things we do, why we don't answer your questions when you give public comment. And also, someone had the quick comment of you need to communicate faster, which is ideal, but there are reasons that we sometimes can't communicate as quickly as the public would like, or sadly, as quickly as social media would like, because social media doesn't have to be really sure of their facts, and we do. So I appreciated being able to have those conversations, and I don't want to make it sound like I can't take criticism. I can, and I'm perfectly happy to hear the things that they think we can do better. But there are also some reasons that we can't do everything people want us to do. And so I appreciated the opportunity to have the dialogue.
Good. Superintendent, did you want to give any feedback? This was your first opportunity to do to participate in one of the board's town hall.
So first of all, I was so impressed by the level of knowledge and depth of knowledge that each board member has about all of the programs and the history of Issaquah School District. Just because it's you don't talk about that because it's usually our team talking about that. So it's nice to see that depth of knowledge in action. And I appreciated the tools for engagement that really helped to see what the room is sort of thinking about through the use of Menti. So I appreciated being a part of that and being able to hear the dialogue and to just appreciate the board.
Great. Well, it sounds like overall it went quite well, and we will work on our next one. All right. Next up is works in progress. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you. So a couple things that I'll update the board on, and then share some different celebrations that I'd like to just highlight at the end of the time for works in progress. So safety remains a top priority for us, given all that's happening in the world around us and our neighboring area in Seattle, and the various events that have happened over the course of the school year for us. So I just want to remind our community, I think it's always important to say that we always have resources available to address and support both our counseling and mental health. We have a webpage devoted to that. We also have a webpage devoted to district grief resources. So I just want to remind people that we have those available. Oftentimes we bring these resources forward and we highlight them at a time when there's a need, but they're always available, and that we do have counselors and Swedish mental health representatives at each of our school sites. So we just want people to reach out and to feel like they are supported in whatever they might be experiencing. So that's number one. I also want to say that this came up as a topic this morning. I met with along with Executive Director Andrea Zier of high schools and Principal Connolly at Issaquah High School, about 70 students in the ASB. And for two of their class periods, led by Mr. Evans, the teacher. And their desire to continue to have access to resources on a regular basis was very important for mental health, for social and emotional well-being, and for other incidences that might create a need to reach out to others and to build those, continue to build those trusting relationships with adults so you have someone to go to. Other topics that came up for our students were giving us feedback about urgent priorities for the district, which included mental health, sports, and social and emotional well-being, and how we can do more to bring about student voice. And they had some great concrete ideas about that, and making sure that we were looking to engage and ways that they could also engage with students that were not necessarily part of ASB, or who were class representatives, or who were ISD school board representatives from a student lens. So that was really great and very energizing. And I want to thank Andrea for her leadership in helping to get that in place. And we will be headed to Liberty and Skyline in the coming weeks. For middle school, I did want to provide an update, and this might actually address one of our public comments tonight as well. But during the EL 11 monitoring report, questions were asked about how we might help support some of our middle schools and make sure that our middle schoolers are being their best selves throughout the day. and how they move throughout the day. And so one of the options that Executive Director of Middle School, Sherry Cox, had talked about in relation to IMS specifically was looking at the bus schedule so that we could think about how we could move kids more quickly into the school. And so we will be adding some supervision capacity so that students can get off the bus immediately. For our elementary schools, on Wednesday, all our preschool teachers, including ECE, ECAP, and ITK, attended professional development at the Holly Street Early Learning Center. The topic centered around the common curriculum, which is called Creative Curriculum, that all programs are beginning to use. And some of that work is all focused on inclusive practices, and it's providing, for us also a common curriculum across the different programs, so students can have access to a least restrictive environment while also learning common learning standards. So this is just a further step to recognizing the vision and the suite of options for inclusive early learning in Issaquah. So engagement and partnerships, I've continued to engage as part of the first 100 days, even though it's, maybe kind of officially ended or concluded in terms of a day count. But ongoing additional meetings are really important to continue to further my own learning, but also outreach on behalf of the district to other members of the community. That includes continued meetings with the Issaquah Schools Foundation. We have a lot of events and also meetings in this month. I've met with the new executive director, Paul Pitkin, who is new to his role. And we met one-on-one to get to know each other and to hear more about opportunities for overlap. And then there's a new president and CEO of the Issaquah Chamber of Commerce. And so I had a nice meeting with Julie Hartwick this week as well. Our all admin met this week. And at that meeting, I shared an overview about our approach to strategic planning. And we led a whole group session led by and facilitated by Assistant Superintendent Donna Hood, and then had further breakouts for evaluations based on type of position and employees where people were providing evaluations. So it was a very timely opportunity to just go deeper and calibrate on best practices for evaluations and some reminders in that regard. Speaking of strategic plan, we are moving forward with contracting with a consultant to start that work officially. And we're hoping that will be officially kicked off in January and more to come. And I know that we have some dates for scheduling that will overlap with the calendar portion of our time today. From an equity and family partnership lens, I'm pleased to share that we're Elena Siva-Dawson and Donna Hood. We've been meeting with the IEA to launch an equity advisory committee. And we will have up to 20 participants in that group. And so more to come, but we've been doing a lot of planning and coordination, and we're excited about that work to move our conversation on equity forward across the district and to tap into the insights and expertise of many of our teachers and administrators. We also have a strong number of voice mentors, and we have some matches already in place. So close to 300 matches with many more students on the waiting list, of course. So we are looking for more voice mentors. If you know of anyone, please refer them our way. We conduct training, throughout the year, and we'll welcome people and help make more matches. And I just want to highlight that we have found mentors who speak the following languages. I'll just highlight this because it's really great. Arabic, Chinese, English, Farsi, Korean, Russian, Spanish, and Vietnamese. So a very wide range of languages overall. A couple of things on operations and finance. Yesterday, the district completed the sale of refunding bonds to refinance outstanding 2012 bonds. It was a very successful refunding sale, and the district was able to save taxpayers $2 million over the next 5 years. And the board had approved the delegation of authority for this matter to the CFO, COO Martin Turney, and myself at the September 22nd board meeting. A couple of operations follow-up items as well. So at the last meeting, when EL 13 was and EL 13 is slated to be up for later today, but I did want to say that we got some direct feedback from two of our student representatives, Nathan and Paige, related to some items both at Skyline and IHS, related to tiles in the ceiling, water bottle refilling stations, composting, as well as some sort of janitorial maintenance in the hallways and so forth. So I want to say thank you to Paige and Nathan for calling attention to those topics because they did get a lot of input from their peers. And also, that's the whole point of student input, is to get feedback and then act on it. And I want to thank Executive Director Jason Morse in operations for taking action right away and working with his team to move forward on all those items. So thank you very much. I will close with a Veterans Day statement, which is there have been a lot of assemblies to honor Veterans Day across the district. Executive directors of elementary school, Melinda and Susan, were happy to attend various in-person Veterans Day assemblies at several elementary buildings. At one site, veterans from all branches of the military attended and were honored for their service through student speeches and singing. Veterans and families who could not attend were honored in photo slideshows. And a highlight at Briarwood was the joyful voices of hundreds of children singing a thank you song to our veterans. And it was great to sort of welcome community back into our schools, but also get to see and greet veterans in person. And I'd like to thank all of our veterans and active military reserve members on our staff for their service. In the administrative ranks specifically, we have Martin Turney, who has served, Dave Montalvo, Doug Coburn, Brandy Falk, and Dave Reynolds. And overall, we have over 30 employees who have identified themselves as serving the military and our veterans now. And we want to thank them, and we celebrate them and many more in our community as we enjoy a day off tomorrow. So thank you.
Great, thank you. That's certainly a lot going on right now, a lot accomplished. All right, any questions for her on any of that? All right. All right, let's move on to the high school athletics and activities discussion and turn it over to you guys. I know you have a presentation for us.
Great, I'm just gonna. We have Executive Director Andrea Zier to kick us off, and she'll be joined by Mariah Banasic as well in Finance and Budget.
Hello. So tonight I'm going to be sharing with you a little bit about high school athletics around access and opportunity. Wait a minute for the screen to get ready.
Down the line, can you guys see the board?
Yes.
Are you good? You've got it? Okay, got it. I just want to make sure, because otherwise I could have them pull the board out. Okay.
We good? Okay. All right. The purpose of this presentation is just to provide an overview of the athletic opportunities that are available to the students in the ISD and provide some details about the participation levels we have in our high schools, how the staffing ratios work, and what are our sources of revenue as well as expenditures around sports. And then at the end, we'll have an opportunity to just engage with you all on questions to help us inform some of our goals, our approach, and next steps around making sure we have a great effort to promote access for all of our high school students who want to participate to be able to do so. So as listed in our Issaquah School District Athletic Handbook, the goal for our athletes in the Issaquah School District is to support academic achievement, promote the physical, social, and cultural development of the whole person, and to develop character through our athletic competitions. The sports that we offer by season are there. So you can see the fall, winter, and spring sports. So for fall, there's cross country, volleyball, girls soccer, football, swim and dive for girls, tennis for boys, and golf for boys. And then in the winter is basketball for both boys and girls, gymnastics for girls, swim and dive for boys, and then wrestling. And then in the spring, we offer baseball, golf for girls, soccer for boys, and then softball for girls, tennis for girls, and track and field. The blue diamonds there indicate which of the sports are cut programs. And I also want to note that I put an asterisk next to a couple of the co-ed sports just because they are co-ed and open to all, but the participation numbers heavily sway towards boys. So just wanted to, when you look at the numbers, it's sometimes misleading. And then just a note on cut sports, our cut sports are aligned with KINCO and the WIA around which sports are cut sports versus which ones are not. And primarily that centers around the cost of the programs in terms of student to coach ratio, as well as facility limitations. Our gym use in winter sports is already like a giant puzzle and a competitive space for programs to get a little piece of to make sure they're all having the ability to practice. So adding more teams would just add to that facility demand. And that's part of the reason why some of those sports are the cut sports. So it's really around facility limitations and costs. The student athlete numbers are for fall. I just wanted to touch on why we're focusing on fall of 2022. So Final Forms is the program we use for athletic registration. And that is a program where we can pull all of this data. I will say when we started with Final Forms, I don't think we ever intended it to be a source for pulling data for board reports or board information. And so in order to do that now, we've learned a lot by making these reports, which is that there's not consistent use of how we've been using Final Forms. So to go back in the past and pull the data cleanly was going to be challenging. So we've done some training and some cleaning up with our coaches and our ADs to use Final Forms better to make sure we can do that moving forward with every season. And we could go back in time, and I'll just give you a couple of examples of what I mean by this. So managers, there's often student managers for sports. And let's just say use wrestling, for example. A wrestling team might have 40 boys on it, but they might have 3 managers that are female. And the coach, in order to make sure that the managers receives the same communication around practices canceled, or it's a snow day over December break, so we can't meet, or the game has changed and been moved to this location. They added managers to their team rosters, and that sways the data because it would show 3 additional females as part of the program, but they weren't actually participating in wrestling. They were managers. Additionally, some of our students who enroll and register to try out for sports, but later change their mind, not necessarily being cut, just decide between the time they register and participate. Not all of our coaches and ADs were removing them from Final Forms because they didn't need to. So they were still sitting in there as a student as part of a program that wasn't. And so it skewed our numbers in past seasons before this school year. Now that we can utilize Final Forms to its fullest capacity to not only help with registration and communication, but also with pulling really great data for us to look at. Moving forward, we'll be able to get all this data really easily every season. So here you see the participation and the total numbers by school, broken out by boys and girls. And I'm not going to repeat, I know previously Executive Director Cox kind of went over some of the issues with how the gender is in Final Forms, and we're working on that. So I just want to say that's the same for the high school numbers. The next, sometimes this thing is real sensitive and then times it's slow. The next slide here is about percentage of participation. I decided to put this data out in percentages just so you can get an overall sense of how many students within any group participate at the schools rather than just raw numbers, because while you all probably have a great knowledge of FTE at the buildings, like total bodies versus FTE can be confusing when you just get a number of 200. So looking at it in percentage to the students that are actually enrolled in the school was helpful to me, and I was hoping it's helpful to you. So here you can see the total percentage of students at each of the high schools, that first column. So that means out of the whole student body, how many participated in a fall sport. Then you can see out of the percentage of all of the females enrolled in each of the schools, how many participated in a fall sport. And then you can go on to see the percentage of males, percentage of the students who are served with IEPs, percentage of students who are served with a 504, and then again, the percentage of students who are receiving ELL services. So just a note, again, these are percentages, but also a student may show up in multiple categories. So if there is, let's say, a female student with an IEP, she would show up as a percentage under total students female as well as students with IEPs. These are the cut numbers. We talked about wanting to take a look at those. So for fall sports, the cut sports are tennis and golf for boys and volleyball and soccer for girls. And those are the numbers. And then just to remind you all, cuts are determined by the tryouts. So all of our cut sports have tryouts at the beginning of the season. Their first few practices are tryouts, and they all, the coaches set the criteria. So they create rubrics and communicate with the criteria to those who are trying out. And then cuts are dependent upon the size of the group and interest. So for example, while golf is a cut sport, sometimes there's not more students who try out for golf than there are rooms, so we can accommodate all of them. So it doesn't necessarily mean that each of these programs faces cuts every year. It varies based on how many are trying out year to year. Thank you. The staffing. So the staffing can be a bit confusing. So I've actually through this done a lot of learning and getting ready for this presentation, particularly around staffing. My knowledge was a little bit low and I had some help from our director of HR, Carlina. And so what I've learned is that each team gets a stipend for a coach. So if there is 3 teams, for example, for baseball, they have a JV, a varsity, and a C team, that program would get 3 coaches. When you look at the staffing ratio sheet, it can be a little bit misleading because it shows baseball starting with a head coach and an assistant. But the assistant is the default JV head coach because baseball has historically for lots and lots of years always had at least 2 or more teams. So they start out with a preset number of what's pretty much guaranteed to run because of historical performance and group size in those sports. And then they have to wait for additional enrollment to add additional coaches. So while the staffing sheet might show something like a head coach and a varsity assistant also means head JV coach. So it's still 1 per team. Whereas something like softball might only show 1 head coach, but they would get a varsity assistant / JV head coach if their numbers provided enough students to add on an additional coach. Now, some of our programs, like some of our larger programs, like football and track and field, they get a head coach per program, but then they also have some additional ratios because when you have a team size of, 180 on a track and field team, obviously 1 JV and 1 varsity isn't going to cut it for supervision of those numbers. So those have student ratios. So depending on the total size of the team, it's a ratio that gives them a coach per the size. If there are more coaches than the ratios that are explained there, it's because either they have volunteer approved coaches that are unpaid, or they've chosen to split a stipend. So many of our programs, in order to get more people paid on staff, they'll take, let's say, a JV assistant stipend and they'll split it half and half and then have an additional person to make sure that they each get some compensation. But the overall money and funds allotted to the staffing is the same. So sometimes those ratios, you have to look at the FTE that's with the stipend, whether it's 0.5 or 1.0. And then often we do have boosters that donate to hire additional coaches in some of our programs. We ran some facility comparisons. So all of our facilities, when we're looking, I know part of this is to look at equity between gender and our sports. So all of our facilities are shared by both girls and boys, with the only exception being baseball and softball. So our basketball programs practice and play in the same gyms. Our track and field athletes are on the same track. So baseball and softball are the only ones that have different facilities based on gender, simply because of the size of the field and all those things that go along with that. So when we were comparing, we found that all of our schools have the same basic facility setup. So they all have turf and the infield but not the outfield, no lights, scoreboard, fencing, batting cages, all of the basics for each program. The only exception to that is actually the Skyline softball field does have lights and does have turf in the outfield, in addition to the infield, where all of the other facilities in the district have turf only on the infield and not on the outfield. And that's simply because the softball field during some of the renovation of Skyline was moved to the community fields that were already turf for multipurpose use. So the turf was already existing when they moved the softball field onto that location, in addition to the lights, because it's a community facility that has multiple sport ability and a rolling fence to be able to accommodate that. So the turf came already pre-existing, which is why they have a little bit more of a benefit to having lights and outfield turf. And then our facilities, the variances that you can see sometimes with maybe an enhanced scoreboard or maybe something that's like more recently updated, obviously depends on the timeline of construction or renovations or fundraised enhancements that a booster program has made. So here you can see just the graph of the comparison we did for the 2 different fields. You can see the yeses and the nos are across the board when you're comparing school to school. So our 3 schools with the same sports have the same basic facilities. And then I'm about to hand it over to Executive Director Banasic, but I will just start by saying the cost, because part of this is about access for students to participate in sports in the ISD. It's a $200 for the sports fee. I will note that if we do have some of our athletes who are 3-season athletes, so they play fall, winter, and spring, they get their 3rd season for free, so that it maxes out at $400. So they don't have to pay their 3rd season if it's in a given year. An ASB card is required to participate, and our ASB cards are currently at $60. And then they do have to get a physical in order to be cleared to participate. And that cost obviously varies depending on families' unique situations in regards to their healthcare and copays. And then there's just some of those items that students need, like while we do equip them all with their uniforms, cleats is something that is, shoe size and kind of personal. So they do often have to provide their own some components depending on the support. And so those are the fees to participate in our sports in the ISD. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ryan.
Good evening. So I just want to provide some background information on the sports fees real quick. We analyze that data every year and we compare districts around us as well as the ASB card fee. So for example, Lake Washington, they have the same fee for $200 and they have a cap as well. And then Bellevue, they have $100 for each sport and then a max of $300. And Mercer Island has a $250 per sport. And also looking at the ASB card, Lake Washington has $60, so the same as us, and then Bellevue has $75. So a little difference, but we try to be similar to our neighbors. Okay, so more information on the ISD expenses. So ASB general funds and levy support and paying for coaches, officials, event staff, basic uniforms, required equipment, facilities maintenance, league fees, and athletic trainers. And then we have student-driven expenses. So in regards to what Andrea was discussing before, additional coaches beyond the ratios, non-league games and travel, additional upgrades to equipment, as well as outside the basic uniform. So warm-ups, hats, hoodies, team celebrations, trophies, dinners, banquets, and different things like that. So they get involved in developing their program, that different activities they would like to do. So for the resources, so for ISD as a whole, we have ticket sales at the gates. This comes in through the ASB as well as sports fee through the general fund, and then levy dollars that was passed in April that supports activities as well. And then student driven, they have fundraisers, boosters, donations, gifts, and receive different types of ASB funds. They also, the schools apply for a grant through the state for additional ASB support. They weren't awarded it last year or this year, but they do apply each year. Then we also have scholarships to increase access. So with HB 1660 being approved, it allows for free and reduced lunch students to get fees waived. And also we have scholarships available at the school if they didn't qualify. And then we also have coaching training each season to get information out about the scholarships and promote applications as well. And we always like to remind families if they're applying with the free and reduced lunch to make sure you check the consent on that application so that we can get those fees waived. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Andrea. Thank you.
I'm just going to elaborate a tiny bit on the scholarships and then I'll open up for questions. So after a lot of discussion that we had last year around this, we created a video, which is on our parent university sites at our high schools, there's actually a couple videos. One is to encourage parents who have extra funds who are willing to donate to cover other students to like recruit efforts in having to generate more funds from our families. And we're lucky to be in a community where we often have generosity of our parents. We had that conversation in relation to, at elementary school, they go to the pumpkin patch and on the form, it always says, do you want to sponsor another child? And it's just kind of readily built into their programming. And then at high school, it just sort of goes away because it seemed to be more complicated. But we actually partnered with finance and found it's really quite easy to generate and donate online when you're going to pay your own children's fees. And so we trained all of our activities coordinators and club advisors, as well as all of our coaches, as well as the principals, to try to remember to promote that every time there's a big event happening at the school, or anytime the teams are soliciting purchasing of like a t-shirt or a hoodie is one of the examples. So that recurringly we're saying, hey, don't forget when you're paying for your child's swim team hoodie, if you can, please donate and sponsor somebody else who may not be able to afford it, to generate more funds for those students who are not covered by the free and reduced lunch waived fees. So it's super helpful in generating more of a robust revenue source to be able to hit some of those kids who are on the bubble of maybe don't qualify for free and reduced lunch, but still have challenges affording some of the fees associated with full participation in these programs. So that is something that we've rolled out this year, and we're still getting in the rhythm of it. So anytime we layer on something new, I always expect there to be, a little period of time where we're getting better and better at remembering to include that. Always we push that out. So we're working with our coaches, our winter coaches, to get that training and really making sure it's pushed out. So with that, now is the time if there's areas you would like us to focus on after you've learned this, clarifying questions from the presentation, more data you'd want, turn it right over to you.
Questions? Director Maraldo.
So when the booster clubs are doing their donations and support and those kind of things, are they taking into consideration? So we were talking about enhancements to field signs or whatever. Are they taking into consideration any of the Title IX restrictions that we have, that then they might be donating something and then suddenly we're outside of Title IX?
So Boosters is sort of its own entity, and we don't really participate in those meetings where they're discussing that. But I would assume that they have some of those same things that they have to do as part of their 503C and same reporting mechanisms. I'd have to check with them to get more detailed information. There's occasional times when I know that we've noticed that they have a project that they want to do, and we've pointed out, hey, if we're going to do this, this might, this is for one particular gendered sport. What about this other sport? And had some of those open dialogues with them at some of our schools if we notice something that's pretty glaring. And they're usually really great to partner with when that happens.
Is there a reason why you provided the data of the cuts by teams combined rather than separately?
No, I could break it out.
Because it doesn't tell me.
Which team?
Like aggregation doesn't, in general, is not, I think anything.
I think that's just the way Final Form spits out the data for us by season. So I think we'd have to just dig in deeper to Final Forms to pull it from a different data source. I think that was the only reason. I don't think it was intentional to not give you good data, but I'm happy to see what we can do in Final Forms and send an update.
So I guess my question is for Mariah. So what was sent out by our superintendent or by Diane last Friday was the coaching formula. And so it doesn't make sense to me, meaning if we were to pull up the September 22nd board agenda with the supplemental contracts, because that's where this all started, was when I was like, it just doesn't pass the sniff test when I look at it from an equity standpoint. And if you were to pull that up for us, Stephen, if you have the ability to, and we just look at the Issaquah High School girls soccer versus the Issaquah High School boys football. And there's 13 coaches listed on there on the supplemental contracts for football. And there's 4 coaches for soccer. And I understand that you may split them but according to your formula, there would be 5 for football.
You want me to take that one? Okay.
No. not per team.
So I'll take my best crack at it, but these are more HR things than they are Mariah's.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. But I think I've really been doing a lot of learning with the staffing side of this this last few months. So a couple things. One is that football is one of those ones that falls under a coach per team, but also the ratio based on safety and like total number of programs. Because we're talking about a program with maybe like 120 or 30 kids versus a program with maybe 60. And so that accounts for part of it, where there'd be one per team. And at Issaquah, there's 4 soccer teams, girls soccer teams. There's a varsity, a JV, and then 2 C teams. So they should have 4 total. If they've chosen to split one, that might account for 5. And then if football would have the head coach per team, so they'd have a varsity, JV, and freshman team, as well as additional coaches for the ratios of athletes to coaching. And then if they chose to split more of those stipends, there'd be more. I would have to dig right into the September data to really be able to say how many of those were split versus whole stipends to really be able to answer the question thoroughly. And I just don't have that in front of me.
So boys football gets head coach and assistant per team plus.
No, they get a head coach per team, and then they get additional assistants for each team based on the ratio of the team.
Right.
Yep.
Which was what we were handed out, which was for 100, 120, 130, 150 are the cut points
Yep.
that was provided to us.
And then in their program, let's just say they want all their assistants to be 0.5 of that stipend instead of the full stipend. They could easily have a list of coaches that appears to be longer list, but none of them are receiving full stipends. I'd have to really look at their actual coaching data to see.
And I guess for me, I care less about what the coaches get paid. That's what I care about is what is the district spending per student on boys versus girls. And so for me, what I really want to know is, so for boys football, $50,955 were spent for coaches for the football team. And for girls soccer, $21,809 were spent. So versus
Yeah,
when
I
look at-
guarantee some of those are through gifts from boosters to cover the football coaches.
Well, I'm not sure because on the others, so Issaquah, it's not listed, but on all the other teams, it's listed in red letters. It says booster.
Okay.
So on that agenda, so it's actually pretty clear. It calls out which ones are booster funded versus which ones are not. So for me, the question I'm asking is, I would like to know the per student, like, so however many students were in girls soccer, which I think was like around 84.
Mhm.
And if you said boys soccer was around 120, but I would like the validated numbers of those to know what is the per student funding. Because I agree from a booster standpoint, we have limited control about how they're going to spend their money. But if we're spending twice as much on a boy athlete versus a girl athlete for coach investments, that's a big deal for me, especially for Issaquah High School. Because when you go back, if you go back to the participation rates, the
Yep.
slide, Stephen,
They're lower at Issaquah.
and they're lower from a participation rate, not because of sheer numbers. That speaks to how overcrowded Issaquah High School is. And it shows the inequities of participation that, like, if you want to play sports, you want to go to Liberty High School, right? Because there's 1,400 students, but yet, right? I mean, a basketball team has the same number of players on the varsity team at Liberty versus Issaquah, for example. And so from a numbers basis, that's why you see the numbers are actually very similar. If you go back one more slide, and you see the numbers are actually very similar, but the percentages, that really does then highlight like how overcrowded Issaquah High School is and the challenges for access. So it is an access issue in this way too.
So are you saying that we need a whole nother high school so that we can divide the facilities to be more equitable?
And then everybody has more opportunity.
No, I guess for me, it is like, I wonder how that, yes, and. But I do wonder, like, when we hear about some of the challenges going on at Issaquah High School now, and I wonder, like, part of what we collectively want is our students to be able to plug in and engage. And it seems like there's a barrier caused by 2,300 students in a building that Liberty, like, I really love that 1 in 4 students at Liberty High School is playing a fall sport. I think that's huge. So I really appreciated you showing it and bringing it down, not just by number, but by percentage. I think that tells a lot of a story about why it's so critical that we fix this problem for our high school students and Issaquah in particular.
So just to summarize what I've heard so far is the cut scores broken down by each program, as well as the cost per student of the coaching stipends that we cover, not that our boosters donate, for the genders, like the cost per female versus male of the coaching stipends and how many students they're serving.
Yeah,
So-
not us, the spend, like.
The
what
spend,
is-
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what's the ratio?
So it costs us X per, yeah, you got it.
Yeah, and so the dollars per
Yep,
student
how much we
versus
spent.
like the number of coaches per students
Right.
because of this, I don't want to call it a trick, but of taking the stipends and spreading it over multiple coaches, you end up with more bodies. But we want to focus on the dollars.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm gonna have to do some fun math around our co-ed sports. So, but I can do it by percentage of the students in the program. So does that make sense?
Well, I mean, what Skyline has one girl.
Right. Yeah.
So I think you can.
I can give it in both ways, just overall, and then,
Well,
yeah.
Depends
I-
the purpose.
I'm saying cross
Not just
country
about each sport.
Right, I'm asking you by
It doesn't have to be about boys and girls.
I'm just asking.
Because if you,
I can present it in a few different ways to kind of
Yeah.
hopefully paint a full picture, but yeah.
because you wouldn't want to disproportionately fund football and not wrestling. Two different
Yeah.
sports, even if they both involve primarily boys.
For sure.
I am though interested in the booster amount because we approve those if they're over a certain amount, right? We approve those expenditures or the gifts receiving. And I think we do need to be cautious that we don't receive gifts that then cause expenditures that do put us out of Title IX because they don't have to worry about Title IX. They're a separate 501c3. We do. So I think we need to be cautious careful in our partnership that we communicate that, this is something that we'll have to address and we need to keep an eye on those expenditures that they don't put us out of whack and then we're out of compliance.
Yep, I can add that.
Dr. Mullings, I could tell you, it's your turn.
So I have a very maybe tactical question. I think Mariah, it was in your part about it was ASB levy funding versus, and then there was a second slide. And I just want to go back to that, make sure I understand. I think on that last conversation, part of my brain is a little bit stuck on trying to rationalize that whole funding per sport type, that Skyline and Issaquah are also in different categories of high school sports as Liberty as well. I mean, Skyline and Liberty are 4A high schools and Liberty is a 3A high school. So I think there will be a mismatch by design, right? They're competing against different schools. They're competing in different sizes. They will have different cut criterias because they're playing at different levels. That's sports mom minutia I just went into. So I want to make sure we take that into account as well from people who actually are running the programs and make sure we're not naturally skewing that because they are in different categories of competitive programs as well. So you had one, it was like the category, like there was ASB general fund levy. Maybe this is what I didn't understand. So all of this list is getting funded through some component of these funding sources. And I guess maybe it's specifically ASB, because when you go to the next slide and it says student-driven expenses, those are all still program incurred, not like personal expenses like shoes we talked about earlier. So is this like where fundraising targets are coming in?
Yes.
For
yeah.
the individual team versus ASB? And I guess maybe if you could
Yeah.
explain.
So I'll
that difference.
Yeah, I'll provide some information and some rough numbers as well. So I did take a look. Our sports fees, we received a little bit under $700,000 last year in sports fees, and then in our extracurricular activity in our general fund, we spent over $4 million. And then there is a lot of different ways for the student-driven expenses. So when those occur, they have fundraisers, they have boosters. Sometimes they give to the team and whatnot, as well as donations from the public as well, and gifts. So for the ISD one. So that one, I hope I'm not confusing. So the general fund. So some things live in the general fund that we pay for coaches, and the sports fees goes into the general fund, and then we also have gate receipts that go into the ASB fund, and that goes into different teams into their ASB equity accounts.
If I go back to Marnie's question, if you go back to the other slide, I'm trying to understand where we have gates and where we don't have a gate. So
Yeah.
it would seem this page, we have some sort of gate or control about the influx and the distribution of these funds. Is that the way I can think about the difference between the two slides? And the second slide is we do or we don't have a gate or a control on the distribution.
As long as it abides by ASB regulations, we want the students to drive what they want to do. So we don't get too involved saying, we do still want to consider Title IX and different things like that, but we also, the ASB, they can approve as a student council to move funds around in their ASB into different activities and clubs. So these types of things, they do have fundraisers specific to go travel. For example, cheerleading, they have, I believe it's in Florida, and a national conference. And so they have some really big fundraisers, Winter Cheer, where they raise money to go do that. So they kind of plan ahead in different things they would like to do.
Can you go back one slide? Thank you. So I don't know if this will help. I'm going to try. I was an ASB person and I sat in lots of ASB budgeting meetings, and I think maybe this can help. So there are certain things that we rely on as expenditures every year. For example, we have to have a certain presence of officials at every game. Like you have to have a this, and this to run this particular sport. So ASB in their annual budgeting will agree, like we're going to dedicate X amount of funds to cover these basic things and use the gate revenue that we charge tickets for these events. We get that revenue, and then we can rely on that output going to these set things that cover these basic expenses to help our sports run. And they'll do that at the beginning when they set their budget every year, and they'll agree to pay for the officials for all the sports and certain components of uniforms. We've talked about this before, football helmets, super expensive, reconditioning. So they'll cover all these basic things with their basic revenue that isn't coming from the general fund or levies. Then, now go to the next slide. If certain programs want to do something extra that's above that, ASB can choose to gift a program. Like the ASB students can give them additional money if they have like maybe a one-time expense that they want to do. Like if they want to increase something in their facilities, or if they want to go to a non-league game, like a jamboree or something somewhere far away, and they need additional buses, then they could ask ASB to cover parts of that, and ASB could agree, or they could charge the families, or they could fundraise within their own program. So there's lots of ways to figure out how to pay for these extras, but the basic things to just run the sport are covered through a shared cost between general fund that we cover and ASB's covering some of those things that they know that they're using their gate money from their sources of revenue to cover some of those basic costs. So together, ASB and general funds and levy dollars share those basic expenses that are pretty much guaranteed to run each program's core. And then extras that are not required, that programs just want to do, like these things, like add on more coaches and things like that, can be covered by a lot of those ways through ASB, booster donations, et cetera. Does that help?
It does, I guess. And that last bit, who's making those decisions? Like once like the ASB can or cannot cover it, who's making the decision of we're going to do a fundraiser or we're going to expend more? Is that a coach's decision?
Yes.
Or where does that get made?
Yes. A coach will usually work with their students if they want to. Let's just take a basic thing. Like, let's say one particular program wants to travel to play a non-league game against Camas before the season starts, where we might only see Camas in playoffs normal time, like in the normal season, until we get to like a state playoff, because they're so far away, they're not part of our league. but they're a competitive program with, let's say, Skyline football and Camas year to year. Okay. It's a good example. So they might say, hey, let's do a non-league together. Well, it's expensive to go down to Camas because they're not close. So it's like an extra bus that has costs associated. If the coach and the athletic director want to set up that non-league and so do the students, they'll figure out what's the cost for us to get there and what's going to cover that. And then what are the funds going to pay for that? Can we ask our ASB to see if they'll contribute to this? Do we want to charge all the athletes in the program and see if they're amenable to this and then cover them through scholarships if they can and ask for donations? Or is Boosters willing to give us money to cover the cost of X? So they set up like the idea and then they generate how they're going to cover the cost of that. But it's primarily since we're talking today exclusively around athletics, it's pretty much the coach and the students that work together. Now, whether ASB is going to actually give them funds or they'd have to go through some other outlet like Boosters or charging the students, that is purely up to the student body. They have to decide how they're going to spend their funds.
So wonderful. And so I guess maybe to build on what was asked for my two wonderful colleagues to my left, I guess what I would love to try to understand is like, at what point do you see the all-in number? All in for a program of the kind of school controlled, ASB controlled, and like inter-team decision-making all in. And then how do you compare that across the denominator of total amount of students participating in that individual program and across the other teams? Because that's what, to me, I feel like I get lost in.
I'm going to tap my
There's a
finance.
leakage or something, or I don't know how to describe it, what goes through my head, but it feels like there's so many different places where contributions can potentially come in or not. It's hard to understand across the teams, they're across the sport, across the gender, if there's an equal, a comparable experience occurring.
So for the general fund, that would be for the coaching. So that's going to be looked at when hiring for the coaching ratios. So that's where that look is going to happen for to make sure those ratios are being abided by. And then when it's an ASB, when it's additional, we're always having awareness what's going on at the school and visually, what's going on in the programs. Do they have the same type of equipment? Are they able to do what they want to do? Sometimes you can't fill a coaching position, so the teams can't, they're not able to participate as much as they would like. So some things are beyond our control. But I hope that answers your question in terms of the big one that I think you're talking about is the coaching, and that's looked at through the ratios.
Oh, no, I'm not only talking about the coaching. I guess I'm trying to get to like a case study version of this, like the all-in picture of a team, the funding top to bottom, from the ratios we assign in coaching to what a school, the ASB is assigning to that program, to what the program is choosing to do. Like my role, a case study view of like, what does that actually look like at the end? And this may be, if I'm not asking this correctly, like, it's just hard to kind of talk about it in these individual components.
Well, I think so. I think we could certainly pulling this by all the programs would be like a lot. So I think we could do a case study where we maybe pull like random mixed group. Maybe we look at like who has some high expenditures versus maybe some lower ones and pull those out and break those down. We could absolutely do that. I'm leading to my finance friend because I would need her help in terms of breaking that all down. I think to address, what your main question is, hopefully, is there are 100% inequities based on a coach's level of interest in fundraising. And that is something we're aware of, but it's very difficult to tell a coach who's very excited, or it can ebb and flow between programs with parent interest within that program. Like sometimes you have a few parents in a program that are like willing to devote quite a bit of time to helping fundraise to be able to pay for some of these expenses. And other programs, especially some of the smaller ones, if there's only a team of 14 in one particular program and there's not a robust parent presence for an interest to help partner with the coach to take that on, they might have 14 families that say we'd rather pay the $150 to just go instead of having to do sell coupon cards or do the, X, Y, and Z or cookie dough or whatever. That's more exhausting to me than just paying this one fee to do this one extra jamboree, right? So sometimes it's the whole team's interest. Like I'm like, I don't want to sell cookie dough. So sometimes it can vary based on parents' willingness and interest in fundraising, depending on what the overall cost is to fundraising ratio versus some of those really expensive trips where it's like, no, I'm definitely going to have my kid be doing all the fundraising because this overall experience is very expensive. Or again, you might have a parent who's like, I'm willing to take this on. I'm going to organize the X, Y, and Z and do these 4 fundraisers and be the lead on this to help your program. So it can vary. I think we're cognizant of making sure our coaches know how to do that so that they're set up for success and helping connect them with their parent partners and giving them ideas for fundraising to try to do that. But there are inequities with coaches' interest, parent interest, and what the coaches want to do as far as extra. I mean, coaching is not like a lucrative business, right? And so to all of these things that are extra are more time. And not for any additional money, right? So we are mindful of trying to make sure we set them up for as much success as possible to make it easy on them, but it is difficult and it does create inequities, but we could certainly pull together, I guess, a case study, if you will, on a couple programs.
I think what I'm hearing from Sydney, and you can tell me if I'm getting this right or wrong, but okay, so there's the funding that comes from the district in terms of primarily the coaching, and we're pretty confident that the district is, dotting the right I's and crossing the right T's to make sure it's all equitable. But then you've potentially got additional ASB money coming in or not. And you've potentially got Booster Club money coming in or not. And back in the day, you had Gridiron money coming in or not. And then you've got all these fundraisers or not. And the combination of all that is where we suddenly have no idea what's being spent on sport A or sport B or sport C, because that's all subject to decisions made by the coaches and the players. And it seems like the district has sort of limited control over that, other than, yes, you can tell Skyline Gridiron, no, you can't give us $8 million for a stadium because that wouldn't be fair. But the smaller stuff is like harder to track and hard. Am I getting at what you're saying? Yeah. So I think that's the concern. And I don't know. I'm not trying to create a ton of work for you guys. I don't know how exactly we get it.
I think for me, I'm less concerned about that because I think not that I'm not concerned about it. I would love to have that information, but I think that would be impossible to get. As far as it would require a lot of work for very little, like it wouldn't be actionable data. Like I'd be like, oh, that's interesting. And that doesn't seem like a fair way. I like, that's not fair to ask of you as staff, because for me, like there would be nothing actionable that I would say, well, why are we doing this? What I want to know is the equity between programs, both internally in a school and then between district schools. So like cross-country example, I know that's a really big program at Issaquah High School. But I don't know if they have 5 coaches at Issaquah High School because it's such a big program. And that's like, what's the chicken and egg? Is it because you have 5 coaches and therefore you have a really big program versus Skyline has 3 coaches? And it's not that cross country is not a big deal at Skyline either. But so that's what I really want to know is like, when we see the disparity in the number of coaches between 2 very similar sized high schools, and I understand based on the coaching thing you sent, that it's based on the number of participants, but what I don't know is which is driving which.
Sure.
Because, and I'm not expecting you to answer that today, because same thing, like, so for like, I know that Issaquah made the decision to have 4 high school girls soccer teams, which is great, more participants, I'm all for it. So there, in that situation, I know that the availability of coaches drove more access for kids there at that school. And that happened at Issaquah, and that's great, but that didn't happen at our other schools. And then to follow up just on what Marnie said, for a booster thing, I think we do have to be cognizant of that, because if you look at Liberty, we accepted money on behalf of, for 3 boy coaches for a boy sport and nothing for girls. And so at some point, like what is, like, I think the internal controls and process by which our district finance accepts gifts to make sure that we aren't accepting to then create a Title IX issue. So
which to me is the actionable bit.
Right.
That's why
Yep.
I don't think I want that analysis across every team or need it. But like what practically happens and then what is the guidance or control point that exists. So if we have that, great. But then to compare that to a real walkthrough of here's all the different places it came in, that is the actionable bit that I would like to make sure we have in place. To your exact point, at some point, there's these additional fly-ins, and how do they get properly evaluated or gated or even known to another program that may not know that there's an option to do that, right? If that's what's missing. But that's the bit ultimately I'd like to get to is the guidance or the structure of which these additional sources come together. And because I would hate to later be like, oh, we didn't know, or we didn't gate that, or we didn't pay attention. Obviously, we're paying attention, but that's not what I mean.
That we passively condoned inequity.
Right. Yeah, I definitely see that on the booster side. I mean, the whole, deeper understanding on the general fund, the ASB levy, that's part of that foundation. But then on these sort of on the other side of these extras, the boosters would be an important part to see how their donations to programs are either equitable or inequitable across both boys and girls in different sports. And then as all of this conversation has been about sports. So the next step is also about activities, because while you see, about 20% of students participated in sports, we need to know that the other students, and I know that's just fall sports, they may have other season sports, but have opportunities to engage in other types of activities within our school. And where do they have those opportunities? And how are those things funded and their participation rate? So that's the next thing I'd like to see.
I will just, I don't want to be like sad, wah, but club participation is a little bit harder to get because our club involvement ebbs and flows versus like a commitment to a season. I'll just use my sweet little son, Jackson Zero McCormick. He's on Rocketry Club right now that he joined late because he was finishing up his soccer season, but now he's on Rocketry Club, right? And then if something else happens later, he might have to back out of Rocketry Club because of schedule conflict. So just like Jackson and his Rocketry Club involvement, there's many kids who participate for a short, brief period of time, and then they step out because of schedule conflicts based on either their sports season or other things they have, job schedules, things like that. So our club advisors will keep a roster of each of their meetings, but to actually declare how many students at any given point are part of the club, it'd be much more rough data. Like, generally we have about X amount of students in Key Club versus thespian club versus robotics I can try my very best and I can provide a lot of other information around funding and sources like that. But actual student participation is a little bit trickier on that end.
But if we just focus on the high dollar ones like robotics,
Right.
DECA and theater, I think we'd get a good sense on what equities or inequities exist, because certainly we know between buildings when we saw those budget, like the gap of robotics, at least between Liberty versus Skyline and Issaquah, was stark. But if you told me like, oh, well, there's only 10 students participating at Liberty versus there's 150 at Issaquah, I'd be like, oh, that's consistent. So I think
robotics is tricky because of the different ways they get funding.
Yeah. But I can do
I agree, but I mean, I don't think if we ask for all of them, but we really care about like the ones that have big budgets,
Right.
that
Would be
So I
a good
heard-
place to start.
Yeah, I heard a lot of
Yeah.
different requests, and I think it's probably good for us to take stock of all of these and also what it will take. I've heard Andrea say several times, I can sort of figure it out or might need to get more help I think we have a good compilation, and I trust Andrea's noted all the different requests. So I think we can take stock of that. And also I'm hearing the point of how can we get a snapshot of a few, right, to help us grapple with. And so there might be a way to sort of get a snippet of something, but a little bit more deeply. And then we can, not triage, but prioritize in that way. So we'll take stock and figure out what the complexity and or ease of getting data is, but also think about it from the case study perspective and also the high value amounts.
well, I'd encourage you to do something like basketball and soccer because that has the same, it should be the same. Because I'm really looking at gender
Yeah.
equity, right? Those are the same
You're looking at the
size
same
teams,
sports. Yeah.
same number of teams, like
The comparables.
versus comparing football to anything, it's going to be really hard. And football is its own beast.
Yes.
But if you chose something that had the same sport that was boys and girls that existed in all three of our schools, I think that would, I'm just trying to narrow it to a more apples to apples comparison.
Yep, understood. When we're having so many different fruit in the basket trying to compare against. So yes, that makes sense. Thank you for that suggestion.
And just something to consider for the booster donations. Is that something you're looking for this year or prior years?
I think initially my question is there any sort of internal controls that exist or criteria by which they're accepted to look through the lens of, are we causing or supporting Title IX inequities or concerns? That would be my first question. And then the data collection would probably be in the future.
Yeah, I've always been told there is when I've asked, but then I guess maybe details on how that works. So that we do know and understand how that internal control is applied to ensure when they're accepting donations that it doesn't run into issues of both Title IX, which is more about boys and girls, or just across the different sports to some extent.
Thank you.
Because it is our choice to
Yeah.
accept the booster donation.
Yeah, thank you. That's a helpful clarification. We can, as we take stock of what data is available, then we can know how to sort of put forward with a case study and
Yeah.
apples to apples comparison. Thank
Good
you.
examples. Well, this was a good conversation. Thank you for all the work that you did to bring the information to us and engage with us in that conversation. All right, let's keep going. So now we're on to the school year calendar item. And so we'll start with a motion.
I move the board approve the school year calendars for 2023-24, 2024-25, and 2025-26 as presented.
Second.
All right. So any information you would like to start us off with on this discussion? I know we've had a couple of times where we've been talking about it, so I know we've already covered some of it, but whatever you'd like to kick.
Turn
off.
it right over to Assistant Superintendent Donna Hood.
Thank you. Yes, I spoke with our IEA leadership again, and they have been engaging in conversations about these calendars and really want to honor the bargaining process we entered into. And these are the three tentatively agreed to, known as TAs for short, calendars as presented. And they very much look forward to your discussion and hopefully your vote.
All right, open it up to discussion. Director Gallinger?
I don't even know where to start. I guess for me, it's certainly not something that I'm going to be able to support. And I think I want to outline some of the reasons why. So I think it's really hard for us to have a process, like, it's not just the outcome that I don't like, it's where the process is what I really want to talk about. If we're going to have a calendar survey and we're going to ask the community what their opinion is, and then we're going to disregard it, that's really hard for me. So when I look at the calendar survey, we clearly saw that people want to end school before June 9th. We saw that people want to have a snow makeup day. We saw that they don't really want to change our holiday weeks of 2 weeks in the first winter break, 1 week in the second winter break, and spring break. There was a difference of opinion between our staff and our parents between when ideally school would start. Staff was before Labor Day, parents were after Labor Day, like pretty wide gap between those two. When you go and look at our last calendar survey, which is on the website, which was done in 2021. So I was wrong. So whoever in the board had talked about how there was one that we did during COVID, we did it. It was 4 questions and it's on there. And it was consistent with the parents, again, 67% of them saying we want to start after Labor Day. So we asked the question about that. the third year calendar, 25-26, is completely one that is frustrating to me in particular. As an example, when our board policy is that our calendars need to be something that is supportive of our board ends. From an educational standpoint, if our superintendent would tell me, yes, 2-day weeks are better than 5-day weeks or 4-day weeks for educational mission of our school district, I would love to hear it. But in multiple of these calendars in front of us are 2-day weeks. I don't think that there's any educational benefit to having a 2-day week. And I think that's a really big deal that needs to be taken into consideration. This is really, we are here primarily solely to educate students. I don't see a 2-day week as being something that does that. These calendars are and should be driven for student learning, not for the adults in the system. And the calendars that were brought before us seem very driven to support the adults in the system, not the students in our classrooms. The calendar survey, when you look at it and you look at the disaggregated section, and we specifically want to look at Wednesday. Actually, let me go back. So that third calendar, we could check every box of starting after Labor Day, ending before Juneteenth, having a makeup day, and every box that everyone in the community wants on that third year. As long as we didn't go to school, as long as we went to school the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. And so I think what we've heard from staff and from this board is that we want a consistent calendar. So for me, if in the years that we can have and check every box, yet we're going to put a stumbling block in front of ourselves to say, oh, well, we can't do it this year because we want to have the Wednesday before Thanksgiving off. I just can't get behind that because it doesn't make sense. When I look at and break down the numbers, so for the Thanksgiving Wednesday, if you look at the staff survey, as far as the highest one was, yes, we want Wednesday off also before Thanksgiving. That percent based on the number of survey responses was 10. So to make a decision based on what 10 staff have made versus the 21 or the 20,000 students and families in our district, that doesn't make any sense. When you look at the one for the Thanksgiving Wednesday where the community or parents want to keep it as is, that's the majority one, that gap is 188 parents. So yes, very similar number of gaps, but because the numbers, so the percentages can be misleading. So I certainly can't get behind a decision to support a dramatic change in our schedule that doesn't support student learning, that will be disruptive to family schedules, especially when we talk about equity. The families that are struggling the most have the hardest time to find childcare, especially the day before a holiday. And then I don't think there's been any consideration of the ripple effect to the rest of our community, of our regions around. We know that half our staff live in other communities. So if they have school-age children, they're all going to school that day. So not only are we impacting the learning of students in our district, if they're off, and they're going to maybe potentially pull their kid out. So we'll be impacting a ripple effect of the learning across our region. And if there was something we brought to me from our superintendent saying hey, we're all doing this together, we're all changing, that's a different conversation, but that's not what was brought before us. There's things that I want Issaquah to lead on. This isn't one of them.
Open it up to other comments.
I'm still struggling with the statement that there's no educational benefit to a 2-day week. Is that true? I mean, first off, if you're talking about the 2-day week at the beginning of school, I would argue that that's a nice way to sort of ease kids back into school after summer break. The 2-day week before Thanksgiving, I don't know why that would have no educational benefit. I'm struggling with that statement.
I said that it would not have a higher educational benefit than having a 4 or 5 day week is what I said. So no education.
Okay, I misinterpreted what you said then.
So otherwise we would just do 2-day weeks all year long.
Well, no, they have a lot of trouble getting you 180.
Well, my point is if they had more value, we would see them more often in our calendar. And the 2-day week at the beginning of the year also wasn't part of the survey. Like Thursday start wasn't asked. So to have that surprise, be like, oh, look, we did college survey, but actually we're going to choose the date that we didn't ask about. Again, like then why do we do surveys? So everything is connected in the way that like social emotional learning is part of the academic experience. Like those are things that are connected in our system because we know that that's part of the comprehensive education piece. Well, this is also connected to our enrollment. So when we want to talk about our community engagement piece, it's not just the great educational experience that we deliver. It's do families feel heard? Do families feel valued? Do they feel like there's open, transparent communication? Do they feel like there's follow through? In those ways, I feel like that's why from a process standpoint, I feel like, wow, it looks worse to us to have asked the community this when we're going to completely, what's brought before us is opposite of what was asked.
Yeah, again, I don't think we disregarded the survey. I think, yes, we had calendars in front of us. Yes, we did a survey. I do have some issues with the way the survey was written because I feel like it didn't get at some of the information we needed. I mean, as far as I agree with you on your top points, people really wanted to end before Juneteenth. People really wanted their breaks. And if you had to mess with a break, mess with February, but kind of don't mess with the breaks. And they really wanted the snow day. I thought the questions around the Wednesday before Thanksgiving and starting before or after Labor Day were worded in such a way that we got a big chunk of people who said, well, yeah, I'd be okay with that, but I kind of don't really care because other things are more important. And so we did, because we didn't create a forcing function and because we can't always start after Labor Day, have a whole bunch of breaks and a snow day and end before Juneteenth, you know, something has to give. And I feel like people felt most strongly about the end date. So obviously the beginning has to be a little bit more flexible if we don't mess with the breaks. And I just didn't feel like the input around Wednesday was definitive enough. And it was our fault because of the way we asked the question. And I guess the last thing I'm going to say is calendars are a negotiated thing. And I think, you know, this was all negotiated in good faith. And I don't want to disregard, you know, that fact. So, yeah, I'm done.
Director Moraldo?
I would go back to the survey. I do think when you ask, if I were planning an ice cream party and I asked my guests, do you want chocolate or vanilla? And I serve strawberry, that would make no sense. And we did that. We said, do you want Tuesday or Wednesday? And then we said, okay, Thursday it is. So I think what it is about the survey is that the survey very much came across as, hey, we have these ideas. What do we think these might be? The thing is, we had already had tentative agreements with the teachers on these calendars. So we didn't come from it as we are proposing to do these things. What are your thoughts? We are proposing to always end school after or before June 19th. And so therefore we are likely going to have to start before Labor Day. What are your thoughts on that? You know, we are looking at changing a habit that we've had a longstanding tradition of having school on Wednesday before Thanksgiving. We're looking at putting that day off. But because of that, we're going to have to start before Labor Day. What are your thoughts on that? And so we really didn't direct the questions in a way that the community understood we're making decisions and we're going in this direction unless you give us feedback otherwise. And I think that to me is the biggest issue, is that we've asked the community for their input and they think it's just a discussion item and it's actually a decision we're making, that we have really clear guidance on where we're going. And so for that reason, I just feel like I am not I am not certain that the community knows what we would be doing if we said yes to these calendars today. Just exactly that, hey, this is what we're planning on doing. And so I don't know how the community feels about these particular calendars. I would agree that if we're going to start before Labor Day, having it as a 2-day week rather than a 4-day week seems like a waste. I can't put it any other way. It seems like a waste. If you're going to start before Labor Day, start before Labor Day so that you can have those 1 or 2 days of getting back to how do I do school so that learning actually happens that week. And for me, otherwise, it's like, it seems like you're putting this stress and strain on families not being able to enjoy the last weeks of August, which we only have 2 months of summer. And so, which I don't know that when the community says I want to end before June 19th, I'm like, really? Because you're going to be cutting into the best parts of summer. It's not summer yet on June 20th. So to me, I think that it's understanding those forcing functions, and the community didn't quite understand during the survey. And so I don't know that I really feel like they understand what we would be doing to them if we adopted this tonight.
Director Mullings, I'm going to come to you in just a second because I want to just add on to something she said. And that's, if I understood our timeline, we did have a TA'd calendar for the 22-23. And when we discussed that and chose not to vote on it, then they went out and did the survey and then they TA'd the other two.
Correct.
It's not, yes, they did not TA the other two calendars until they had done the survey and until they used the survey data. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is partly why we did not anticipate actually asking about the Thursday start date because they hadn't been created.
Right. And the challenge with, it's easy to say, don't like the 2-day at the beginning. So let's start on Tuesday. But if you started on Tuesday, you would end on a Monday. And so if you don't like a 1-day week, you have an issue at one end or the other. And then I admit that the Wednesday gets involved in that. But that's true about the calendar before. If you on 24-25, instead of starting on Thursday, if you start on Tuesday, you end on a Monday. And people would not like us ending on a Monday either. So at one end or the other, you have a challenge. So, okay, now Director Mullings.
Yeah, so I guess for me, maybe I won't react to any of that and just talk about how I get to where I get to, if I'm honest. So for me, here's what was most important in going through the data and what I asked for, which was I needed to see multiple years to understand how some of these decisions played out. So I'm appreciative of seeing the multiple years. I think it's incredibly helpful. For me, what was important is in the survey, which I think people knew full well, if you ask them questions that you're making decisions, so that doesn't resonate with me. I think what's important is what was clear messaging in the survey. And before Juneteenth, have a snow day accomplished in these for sure. I think what was next was don't mess with any of the longer breaks, Christmas, February break, spring break, accomplished with these. I think when you get into some of these other questions, it's about when do you start the year? And for me, I actually think Labor Day or not Labor Day is a red herring. It's not actually something that's important to me. What was important to me is what is the difference in the length of summer? How many days off in general do people have, whether they get those days on the front end or the back end? That's what mattered to me. So I actually went back many years in our calendars and I counted how long summer was in every year. And for me, this calendar stays consistent with the length of summer and the length of days off in each of these years. And so that's important to me. Next was, what did people think about the Wednesday before Thanksgiving? For me, the data was actually quite clear, maybe differently, which is we had a number of people who said, don't change it. But we had an almost matching amount of people who said, I would like it changed, or I think it would be really great, but if I can't get it, I'll pass. And others who said, whatever is basically the answer. So we actually had a predominance of people who were positive on adding the date. And when I compare that to absenteeism of our students, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, which doubles, I think it's a clear signal that people are not considering that Wednesday important. I think the 2-day school week is an interesting one, but for me, I think you're going to have fragmented weeks at some point anyway in doing all of this. So what is ultimately out of the end of it is what's the predictability? And how does anyone plan for anything? Childcare, breaks, vacations, and really being able to provide 3 years of calendars that match the length of our other agreements for me is incredibly important and a priority I hold quite high. So I'm grateful for the work to get out multiple years. I actually think that these calendars well represent what people responded to in these surveys and well represent the length of breaks and time off people have had historically.
Yeah, I do just want to
Weaver.
add that I think it is important. I think right now, people's priority is where's the calendar? And Harlan's shaking his head, but I think that's what I think.
I think getting it right is more important than getting it fast.
And I think it's right.
Yeah, and just a minute, let the board finish and then I'm going to ask for public input. To me as well, the calendars fairly fit what the survey results were. They all end before Juneteenth. They all build in the snow day. You know, there were 60% of parents said either yes to the Wednesday before or yes, but it's okay if I don't get it. So I mean, there were the set of parents that do want that day off. I think as soon as we say we have to end before Juneteenth, you know, it backs us up pretty much into before Labor Day. And that's a struggle that I think we're just going to be faced with as long as we anchor at the end of the year. I also I have come around, whether you're an elementary parent or a secondary parent. When I was an elementary parent, I was happy to start late and keep a longer summer. As we became secondary parents, it's like started earlier and get out earlier. And so I think it just really depends on where you fall on that. So we have each had a chance to speak unless there's somebody else that wants to add right now. I do want to ask for public input. And so anybody that would like to give public input either on Zoom or in the room can start to head up to the microphone. And again, it's the same. Please state your name and attendance area. Limit your comments to 2 minutes. And we will go from there.
Is there anybody on Zoom?
I'm going to ask for Zoom after the people in the room.
Jody Mall, attendance area, Issaquah High School. My kids are all graduated. I'm a para educator at Pine Lake Middle School. I think you guys as school board directors, yeah, you're going to ask the parents, what do they want? And they're going to give you an answer, but it's not with what's necessarily best for their kids. It's what fits their travel schedule. So it's up to you to go, okay, well, yeah, they want the Wednesday off, but that's because they want to leave town. A 2-day, and Suzanne, you know, a 2-day school week is not as beneficial as being in school 3, 4, or 5 days. And you know what? Those parents are going to take Monday and Tuesday off too. So you're going to lose a big chunk of them for the whole time. And parents needing the schedule, I mean, you can't figure this out in the next month, 2 months. They can wait 2 months. There's not that rush and they don't need the schedule right now. It's kind of, I'm kind of disappointed in Anne and Suzanne as far as wanting to hurry this along. 2-day school days make no sense. I personally would love Wednesday off. That'd be great. But we're trying to make up from COVID and get more learning. And this isn't creating more learning. That's it.
Thanks for your input. Anybody else in the room? Okay, and then Stephen, you'll let me know after this one. There's one on Zoom. Okay, we'll go to that next.
My name's Sarah Porter. I've got kids at Sunset and Issaquah Middle. And my one question is around the survey. I agree that I personally agree that Wednesday off is a bad idea before Thanksgiving. And I would be curious about the survey in regards to who it reached. Because if it was in English and only sent out via the bulletin, I think you get a subset of who our parents are that are reacting to what's happening in the community versus a fuller picture of those people that might be working or doing other things and not. So I just think that's something to take into consideration when you look at survey results. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your input. All right, Stephen, help me get on whoever is on Zoom. Caitlin Schreiber. There you go. Video's coming on. And then now it looks like you're unmuted. So go ahead and let's see if we can hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Awesome. My name is Caitlin Schreiber and I live in the Skyline attendance area, and I'm grateful that you're allowing more public comment about this. And I'm also grateful that you did another survey. And from what I read and what I saw, I don't really see that there was clear preference with Wednesday. And then also the start before Labor Day. And the fact that all three proposed calendars do have that same pattern is concerning to me, because it is a really, really big change, and you're setting a schedule that's going to be set in stone for the next 3 years. I think starting before Labor Day, it's a big deal. And 2-day weeks, it makes it a lot easier for a family to say, well, it's 2 days week, so we might as well just take the whole week off. So I can imagine that the Monday and Tuesday, especially during Thanksgiving, will be a lot easier for families to take off because it's just 2 days instead of 3. So I think you'll be getting a lot more absences. And I do agree, it's got to be really hard for students and for learning, and also for teachers. Like, you can't really start something new or can't continue something on. There can be some learning loss in even just a couple of days. And then finally, because it's different than other districts, those teachers that live in other districts, they're going to have to find childcare. And I also do worry about the component of people that are working jobs that have to work on Wednesday and they have to find childcare. I have always appreciated the fact that the district has recognized the unique climate we have here and weather that we have here. And those days in August are really, really precious. Around Labor Day, those are really, really precious. And so I would say at the very least, just pass it for 1 year and see what it's like. And then you can see how you want to do it in the following years. So it's really nice to have a calendar ahead of time. Absolutely. But I don't think you need to have all three out. So that's what I wanted to have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your input. Is there anybody else in Zoom? Nobody else has a hand up, and anybody else in the room? All right. So we're back to the board. If there are any additional discussion.
Yeah, I don't think that we need to have 3 years worth of calendars. Like, so the issue is if the push is like, oh, well, you need a calendar for next year, then okay. And if it's a controversial calendar, then why would we do 3 years of it? Like, why would we want to make a decision like that? So that doesn't make any sense to me.
Anyone else? Okay, if there is no other discussion and no other motions on the floor, then we'll take a vote on this motion. This motion is on the table to approve the school year calendars for 2023, 2024, 2024, 2025, and 25, 26. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, it's a 3-2 vote, and those 3 calendars have been approved. All right. All right. We now have moved 2 ELs from the consent agenda into our regular agenda. So let's just do EL1 first because it's first.
I move the board accept the monitoring report for EL1, Global Executive Constraint Internal, as presented.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second for EL1. Since this was pulled off the consent agenda by Director Gallinger, do you want to indicate, do you have a specific question or, okay, so let's start there.
So first off, I think that the consent agenda is a great place for meeting management in a lot of ways. I think having a new superintendent in her first year, I think we should be reviewing about every one of them, because the whole point of this is to discuss the interpretations that are there and to be able to talk about it. And for her own Friday update, talked about looking forward to discussing and, hearing your thoughts on this. So I was surprised to see them show up on the consent agenda, frankly.
Yeah, it
The
was
ones-
a choice. It was a
Right.
struggle as we looked at the calendar and how many to get through and whether we should put them all on the regular or consent. So it's good feedback.
When it's the series of like our financial ones where it's like 1, 2, they're all like really similar. I
Mhm.
understand like putting 1 on and 2 off. That one I get because they're all super similar. And then we kind of just globally talk about what the interpretations and impact are. These
Mhm.
ones I feel like would benefit from just pure conversation. So in this one, I don't actually have particular feedback like I do for the next one, but I do have a question and I don't know how we go about this. For this EL1 global executive constraint for the last school year, I'm not sure that our district was in compliance for that. So, and I'm not sure that we are ready to have a lot of conversation about that. So what do we do in this scenario? Meaning, should this be one that is actually turfed to, let's say, May or June, that it's still in this calendar year? Or would we bring it back? Because I don't like, I'm literally, so this one I brought it forward because it's a procedural question. Because I don't think the district was in compliance for this for the last school year, but it has no bearing on our superintendent today. So that's why.
But if you put, I know what you're talking about. I don't disagree with you, but if you put it off till May, what does that accomplish? It's still the monitoring report for the prior year.
That maybe we'd be able to have a conversation about it that we can't have today. And I just don't know. That's what
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we can.
Yeah, because I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just sort of procedurally trying to
Right.
figure out where we would go.
I'm sorry to throw all these procedure questions at this meeting.
Right.
It's just
Yeah,
like,
all in one, gosh.
My thought on it is that for what we know today, with confidence, for what we know, I think I am comfortable passing it as is. If something arises and we find out that that's not the case and that maybe we weren't in compliance, then I think an emergency monitoring is the appropriate means by which we would do anything. So if we learn something later on about EL12, that it wasn't being done in a fashion that we were wanting that to be done, then we would bring it for an emergency to address that issue. So I think that's what we would do in this case as well.
But I thought emergency was ones that were impacting this year, that you had a concern in the moment because, hey, we are out of compliance for what's going on in this current state, but that maybe I misunderstood what doing emergency monitoring was about.
Well, it would also be if you have new information
Right.
about a monitoring that had been done.
So
Yeah,
then we
that
would
would
go
be
back,
fair.
we would go back and then say, we are going to amend our finding and say potentially from in compliance to out of compliance. It's a question.
I don't know. I don't think we've ever faced it.
I would say that's how I would,
Right.
that's how I would manage it if I were managing the system. I would say that as of today, I don't have any evidence to present that puts us out of compliance. If something comes up and I have evidence to put us out of compliance, then I would bring that back and say I would like to remonitor that EL.
Oh, you turned it off. I thought
didn't
you were
mean
gonna.
to- No, I didn't mean
thought-
to have it on.
Okay. We can, because we've done that before. If this is a matter we want to take up at a later time, the motion can be withdrawn with agreement of the second.
I'm fine taking Marnie's, if that's the
Right.
consensus of the
Because at
board
this
from Marnie's
moment-
approach, like, I'm not opposed to that.
I think
just-
that's weird, though.
I just want,
I think it would be
feels weird to me
to
too, but-
remonitor something that we've already agreed.
But if
to.
you have new information, that's what it would be based upon. Otherwise, we could never go back and take a look at something that happened in the past if we learned something that we didn't know.
Because I am willing to withdraw the motion and postpone the monitoring. And I'm looking at you guys because this is uncharted territory.
For me, the most logical thing would to be to base the current decision based on current information understanding that future information may require the remonitoring. Otherwise, why would we wouldn't approve anything? Because the idea would be in the future, something could be different.
Yes and no. I mean, this one is unique. So, and again, I defer to the board. I brought this up because, and why we didn't talk about this, because just probably knows, we don't have private conversations about these things. So even the procedural things, so you get to see like, this truly is like, we unfortunately honor all the rules about what open public meetings is, which means we have these very weird things.
Superintendent, here, hold on, Director Moraldo, let me give her a chance.
Thank you for discussing the monitoring report time lag when there's a transition in superintendent leadership. I think it's appropriate to share. And I myself had that thought in my mind as I was preparing for this with the team. As I, will tell you more about what's in my mind on interpretation, because I think that's what the sort of question at hand is. And I think it's important for me to share what changes I made and how I see that. And when I say look forward to discussion in the future, it was sort of like a more global statement, like for all the ongoing ones, not necessarily the ones that were on consent. So, but fair point. So I take that feedback very with a lot of appreciation. So most of our other reports say the superintendent certifies that the district is in compliance with EL blank without exceptions. I did not say without exceptions because I was not here to verify that 100%. And based on the information I know, I did feel comfortable saying with the evidence that I provided that we were in compliance based on the evidence that was available. So I do feel like I went deeply through, and I did rely on the team, right, to go through the different evidence points to say with confidence that these points are appropriate to me. I have done my own quality check with those points as well. So I will say that from my point of view, that you'll notice that there is not that specific note as there is with other ELs. I also added some components in here that I expect to be part of the evidence moving forward that account for my tenure and leadership and management here in the district. So one addition was around maintaining public trust and confidence. I take that very seriously. And I think that's important to state out loud. When I think about the charge that the superintendent shall not cause, allow, or fail to ... endanger the organization's public image and credibility. That's how I interpreted that as public trust and confidence. I also added, and I have done this through multiple monitoring reports already, talk a lot about systems and structures because that's sort of the wheel that helps the engine go, or I guess it's sort of the engine that turns sort of these aspirations that we have and the goals that we have as a result of the executive limitations. And then I added some very specific components around checks and balances. So I expect to be able to talk with that from my own point of view, because I've come from different organizations and I might have other ways of doing things. So I expect that to be reflected in future monitoring reports. So I hope that's helpful just from how I approach this. And also that helps this discussion. I'm open to whichever pathway the board wishes to go, but I wanted to share that.
Thank you. Director Moraldo.
So I was thinking, let's say that we had taken a look at our discipline EL and we were in compliance from all the information that we had. And then we found out that we had, an employee that was no longer with the district this school year, but last school year conducted in corporal punishment without us knowing. Would we not be able to go back and remonitor last year's monitoring to say that in light of new information, we were not in compliance of that? Because I think for me, that's some of what is difficult is sometimes we go ahead, we do a monitoring and then we find out something's happened and we don't really have a way of going back and saying, oh, we weren't in compliance. This thing did happen. So I would think that I could go back if we found out like, hey, this incident happened, or, there were these issues in the previous school year. How do we go back and say, well, we weren't in compliance. We thought we were. So to me, it's if we ever get new information, that's how I would handle it. So what it tells me is that we actually probably need to look at our policy around remonitoring to include what if we have new information, how do we want to handle that? So in the future, if something comes up and we get new data about something that's already been monitored, we can go back and say, we're going to reflect on that previous ruling and maybe make a change.
Right. It's like in light of new information, you amend that monitoring to note it. But that is not something that we've really done, but it certainly is an avenue because anytime you get new information that is relevant, you have to take it into consideration.
I have no opinion. I was bringing it forth to the board to discuss.
Mhm.
Sorry.
So we can go one of two ways. Director Weaver, I saw you turn on your microphone.
I'm still processing my thought, unfortunately. I agree with everything that Marnie said. I still kind of feel like I'd rather withdraw the motion. And, well, it's my motion. You seconded it. And postpone the monitoring to a future date to be determined.
It's your choice.
Okay, I would like to withdraw my motion. Is my second okay with that?
Second.
I don't think I have to make a motion to withdraw the motion. I think I
No,
just
but
withdraw.
that was her withdrawal.
Okay.
That was her withdrawal.
Okay,
All right.
that was fun.
That
Sorry.
was not particularly fun.
No, I'm
Um,
actually glad you did it.
I just had no other way to ask the question. So sorry.
All right.
If we didn't play by the rules, it'd be a lot easier.
Oh, gosh, I'm even.
Yeah. So why don't you start with a motion for EL 13?
Because I'm on a roll. I move the board accept the internal annual monitoring report for EL 13 facilities as presented.
Second.
And what is the question or issue that you wanted to start with?
So I'll start with number 8, page 4.
Ooh. Who did that?
Failed to develop
Oh, hold on. It's you. One of,
Oh.
you, okay. We're good now.
consistently administer facility use guidelines delineating permitted uses, applicable fee structure, clear user expectations, including behavior, cleanup, security, insurance, and damage repair, consequences, and enforcement procedures for public users who fail to follow the established rules. And then number 7, unreasonably deny the public's use of facilities as long as student safety, student functions, and the instructional program are not compromised. And so those two are very similar to me. And I just really want to highlight my concern that our facilities have not been open and accessible to our community. And I know that there have been a lot of staffing challenges post-COVID. And I know that it's just a lot. And whether it's a limitation of administrative support at the building or custodial support, or I don't know any of what goes behind what it takes actually to go from A to Z to when you want to rent a space to when you actually get it. But we've heard from multiple different people and groups about whether it's access to a theater space or a gym or a field at a frequency that we haven't heard. Like, we would get them scattered over the past 7 years, but nothing like we've gotten this fall. And so my concern is about what is our current state, because this is about last year, and last year was fine for all intents and purposes. Like we didn't hear these concerns last year, and last year we're still just coming out of COVID. So I don't think that there was already, I think everyone understood on both sides of the table, like we're not really opening our schools and facilities because we primarily want to keep our kids safe in the building and not miss school days. Community understood that. This year, return to normal. Part of that is opening our spaces back up. And it just feels like we haven't done that. And so I wanted to hear more about that, because just like the calendar, right? This is a part of like everything works together and nests together, and the community trusts in us and trusts in what we do. And when we ask them every 4 years to support us financially, like this all has to work together. And that's why I brought this forward.
Sure.
So Martin Turney, Chief of Finance and Operations. I do have some information about this. You're absolutely correct. As we've come out of the pandemic era, we are doing our best to open our facilities. However, one constraint is the custodial coverage. So we do have quite a bit of turnover, and we are still trying to fill quite a bit of positions on any given point in time. But we have opened up our indoor and field spaces. And as staff are available to be there for those events, we are doing our very best to make those available. We are struggling at the theater level. So that is definitely something that we can improve on. And we are looking at fee schedules and some other mechanisms to try to return staff that can run those events for us. So.
So isn't this one the opposite of the last one in that you're okay with the report because we're monitoring last year, but you have concerns about this year? Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
And that's because again, we have a new superintendent. That's why I think it's important that we have a chance to talk about it, because otherwise it would be unfair to be like, look we passed it, no problems. And then next year it'd be like, well, these were all the problems that we had last year during the year. You could actually.
Yeah, okay.
build
I just
evidence
wanted to
for
be
it.
sure I had my head wrapped around it right.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an opportunity to talk about what's happening now and what is being done and being thought about being done to help solve the problem, and what limitations there will be that ultimately, hopefully is solved, but if not, then why?
Right. And to highlight that, hey, this would be a problem that if we're monitoring this a year from now, that I would not say the district's in compliance. So, and I think it's fair to be able to have that conversation now rather than be like a year from now, be like, oh, look at, so I believe that last year we weren't in compliance for this laundry list of reasons. So I'll just move on. Number 5, authorize construction schedules and change orders that significantly increase cost or reduce quality. So I think for me, I appreciate the interpretation. Evidence that I would actually like to see is less about like what a change order looks like and more about, hey, here was the total construction cost for Cedar Trails. Here was the change orders that we did, and demonstrate like we didn't exceed. Like if the total project cost was 44 million and all the change orders took us to 43 million, then like, look at, that would be evidence of our change orders didn't exceed the budget of that significantly. It actually was under. Versus Cougar Mountain Middle School, if the budget was 95 million and with change orders we were at 110, like, well, that to me is we're either A, out of compliance, or B, we've had a lengthy discussion with the board on what happened to get us from 95 to 110. So does that make sense about the type of evidence? Like, I don't really care about what a change order looks like, nor do I think that a community member cares about that. We really care about what is the collective impact to the cost of the project.
Well, and I think that also circles back to, in my 16 years, every change order I have ever looked at says, and this is within the project budget, because we keep moving money around with the budgets. And at some point, there needs to be another way of looking at that. Clearly, not every change order is within the project, the original project budget as we knew it. And if we're changing the budgets, maybe the board should be a part of that conversation.
Right. And I'm not saying that we were out of compliance or doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
But
no.
I think that's the
Agreed.
evidence that would be helpful to see, because I think that's actually the intent behind it. Like, oh, here's our change order process, because they're all are always on consent and we always approve them. It's really like, what is the actual impact to the global budget of that project? So.
Right, and that kind of goes to any changes to the budget for any particular project, which we're getting much clearer information about with the new format of the budget status report. But it's about the flow of the change in the budget.
Right.
Projects.
And that's why I just want to highlight, like, so for the evidence, like, it's fine, like, this is again more about last year, but it is a change. It was a formatting that's different than it has been in the past. And I want to just provide that feedback that I think it's not providing the evidence that maybe would be helpful for us to discern.
Oh, Director Moraldo.
So I think this is one of those areas where, I'm happy for this discussion because we probably should have had this discussion a long time ago. The board has asked for years for certain data and we didn't get it the way that was meaningful. And we should have leveraged our voice that this is the area to have shown it. What really on any project, and maybe this is to keep this ongoing, is that there should be a link to saying this was what was originally approved by the board. These are the change orders that were approved by the board. Here is the new project budget. And to be able to see the difference of that and then the impact of the overall bond that it is related to. So I know that work is going on. I'm just saying as a reflective nature, I now reflect that this is where I should have been really pushing that issue and I didn't. So I do say that I feel like I failed as a board director and not doing what I could have done. That's why we have these monitoring reports and how to get what I want is somewhere in all of the executive limitations and ends that we have. And so it's leveraging. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that this is where I should have really pushed the point of what I'd asked for probably 10 years ago.
And then
Mullen?
So I guess I understand the ask. I want to make sure where I'm tracking is I believe like what's in this month's financial statement is getting to what you're asking for, or is there some additional delta of having the starting budget, the changes to budget, the total expenditures for each one? Is that it, or is there something else when you get to like change order by change order that you still think is needed in the monitoring?
I would want to be able to link to the annual data on that.
what would be summary data?
Yeah,
for
summary
me?
data,
So like Cedar Trails.
Right. So that's why I'm looking at, I'm actually looking at this month's August budget report that's in the consent. And my first thought was, great, we're getting that now, but it sounded like there was an additional ask. And I just wanted to make sure I was hearing what you were pointing out correctly. So
Well, I guess one part of the ask would be, so we have that as a static, and now there are additional change orders. How do we see that reflected back into the next one? How are we in that loop of the changes to the budget that would then be reflected? Because if all change orders come and say it's within the budget, it's only because somebody changed the budget.
Right.
Unless the budget was set at a place with anticipation of change orders coming in. And then that is also a different.
Which is
But-
fine. In that way, Cedar Trails is an example where it was, and it accommodated that versus Cougar Mountain did that.
Right.
Because I'm giving just
two
two
different
very disparate
examples.
examples where
The change orders stayed within the original or the budget versus where change orders took us out over the budget, but yet then the budget was changed to still be within the budget.
no, I
Yeah.
totally understand the past behavior. I just,
How do we see it going?
It sounds like, I just want to make sure we're pointing out to make sure the next monitoring is correct. What sounds a little bit fuzzy is if what is included in the current budget is sufficient, or if you're still wanting something more than that.
Director
And I'm
Whitaker?
just asking that for me.
I don't know.
I'm sure they
Yeah.
want to know too, but for
Well,
me, it's not, it's
I
unclear.
think this scratches a lot of the itch, right? This is what we've been wanting for forever. And I would say, for me, the only piece of this that is missing is that at some point during the Cougar Mountain build, there should have been a conversation with the board that, yeah, we are encountering all these things we weren't expecting to encounter. And we think the project budget will increase by X. Now, we did have the conversations around, yeah, the mountain is falling down. We have to shore up the mountain. We have to do all these things. And we knew there was a financial impact, but we never really talked about the scope of it. We never really talked about what is that number that Cougar Mountain is going to end up costing us more. We just nodded because they said, well, it's okay. We've got the money. We can do this. And I think a little more specificity around that would be good. But this report is absolutely, once you've had that conversation, this report is exactly what we need. that make sense?
So a forecast impacted by change request is what you're asking for versus what's in this report, which is a period summary over the last year.
I'm not saying for every change request. I'm saying that at some point, it becomes really obvious that we are not going to build Cougar Mountain Middle School for $74 million. And
Yeah.
it feels like there should be a conversation around that. We anticipate it's gonna
Material
cost
change.
us 30 million more, or
Mhm.
whatever the number is.
And it centers around, right, the board language was authorized construction schedules and change orders that significantly increase cost or quality. That's why the change orders are part of my question. Otherwise, I don't really care about change orders. I really care about what start, what's end, and what happened in the middle.
Director Moraldo?
So what I would see is this is a monitoring report. So it's very different than what we have presented, which, by the way, I appreciate what we have presented in our monthly financials. I would assume that for me, a monitoring report is over what has happened in the year. So my suspicion is that if I were to build the columns, I would want to know what was the original budget? What is the current budget with change orders from previous years? So what was the current budget at the start of the year? What was the amount of change orders requested for that project during the monitoring year? And then, what is the balance or what is the difference or that last column? But I think it is important for me to know I'm monitoring the current or that previous year. So what were the change orders that occurred during those years that we approved? And are we still in alignment with the overall cost of projects in the district?
I want to thank you for the conversation. I've been taking my notes and I'll come back and listen to this again to make sure that I pick up on everything. It's very helpful. I know we always have some improvement we can do as far as what we're providing and the transparency. So we will work toward getting to you what you're looking for.
And the last one is 6. This was kind of more funny. Allow facilities to be unclean, unsanitary, or unsafe. As far as the interpretation, I think the most important part is the last clause of informal standards of the Issaquah School District community. I think that's the most important part. And we heard that from our students who provided direct input on the condition of some of our schools. And I think if we were to ask our students across the system or our staff, we would get a whole wish list of things that they would think would be unclean, unsanitary, or unsafe. And I'm not asking for you to do that. But the focus of the evidence of compliance about being like the DOH guidelines on COVID or like from a Department of Health standpoint didn't really, I think, scratch the itch of the intent of what it was meaning to be versus the last clause of your interpretation did. And so how to like drive the evidence to support that. So my funny question is at Pine Lake Middle School and the disaster that is the track from the nest on top of the light, like that's unsafe, unclean, unsanitary, like all of those things. Like at what point do we and can we address something like that? And I know it's not the only building that we have that there's a bird that's decided to make a nest somewhere that is destructive to our facilities.
Mm-hmm. So I have worked with, we have a nest at Skyline as well. We've worked with that. I'm sorry, Jason Morris, Executive Director of Operations. So I can certainly go out and assess situations. Those issues become complex as we work with rules and regulations around protecting various species of animals, including raptors in this case, as far as when a nest can be either relocated or is it better to leave the nest where it's at. And this is a common problem in our area. as we have a lot of water resources and forest resources around, we're blessed with local wildlife to many extents, but then also the cleanup can be hard. I know it is a consistent struggle for our maintenance and groundskeepers because those nests are quite large and they drop a lot of debris. And it's tricky at a school like Pine Lake, because unlike a high school where they have a full-time stadium caretaker that can kind of keep up with that, we have to hit it, throughout a course of, say, buildings that maybe a particular groundskeeper might have 4 buildings assigned, so they have to rotate. Those are challenging, and relocating comes with cost. So I'm more than happy to kind of assess that, where I've seen Pine Lake, and I know specifically Skyline. I'm sure there's other ones, I just haven't gone out to every field and seen them. I have, however, seen them in just about every field locally that I attend for my own children's sporting events. So there are methodologies. They do come with cost because we have contracted with various agencies that legally and safely, when they can, help relocate or help establish a more appropriate nesting site, because we want to also obviously live symbiotically with those animals as well.
Yeah, and why I bring that up is if someday soon we light Cougar Mountain Middle School, like what mitigations on top of the lights will we put in place to make sure that we don't have the same problem in future lighting projects? Like that's
so. As an exemplar, a project I spearheaded, I think 5 or 6 years ago, was actually at Skyline High School for some similar bird related damage. And what I ended up doing was covering downspouts and scuppers so that they would not become clogged with nests. So they would actually move water away from the building. So point well taken. Are there design features that maybe make it more difficult or more challenging for a nest to exist on one of those sites? I can certainly, if we look into a lighting of Cougar Mountain, if that comes to fruition, work with our capital projects department on the bid process. I have seen and I'm not suggesting we go down this road, but I have seen other schools actually put up a nesting pole, I assume in hopes that bird would choose that pole and not a light pole. And we can put the pole in a place where we don't mind if debris falls. So there are likely solutions. I don't know if they're all 100% guaranteed, but good input.
I just know that I'm sure the cost of moving the nest would be a lot, but I guess worry what is the cost of the damage to our facilities by not addressing it. And as time goes on, and it is unsanitary and unsafe.
I feel deeply educated about raptors as we're sitting here looking at Seattle Raptors at the moment. It's very, as a person with a deep upset with birds, this is very upsetting.
I told you it'd be the funny question, but I just.
All right. Are there any other comments on this one before I ask for public comment, since we now have it before the board out in our regular agenda? Okay, is there any public comment on this particular item, either in the room or on Zoom? Nobody on Zoom. Okay. Anything else? All right, then we have a motion before us for approval of EL 13. I got that right? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, EL 13 is passed. And we are on to legislative matters. All right.
Well, the election has come and passed, and there's been no changes for our local liaisons. I think that once the congressional race has been decided, it would be good for us to have a meeting with Representative Schreier, if it's her or the next person. So otherwise, we had a recent meeting with Representative Callan. So thank you, Director Moraldo, for joining. And have still the schedule with Senator Wellman.
All right, anything else? I was just going to mention that I did attend the WASDA networking call today. where they were taking feedback for OSPI related to the pandemic. And so I gave them my feedback in the Menti. So I did participate in that. All right. Anything else? All right. Then on to announcements and correspondence. If anybody has anything they need to report. Doesn't look like it. All right. Now we're on to calendar and future agenda topics. We do have a few things that we need to do to calendar. The first one is the Renton land petition. This is similar to the one that we dealt with earlier in the year, related to a petition to the ESD for a section of Renton to be moved into the Issaquah School District. Yes. And so like before, they're looking for 2 board members to have a meeting with the Renton Superintendent and Renton School Boards. So on the piece of paper that got put out, there are a couple of dates and times that have been coordinated. So I don't know if anybody is so willing. They're next week on the 14th, 15th, and 16th. I know both
Well,
of you're already in
probably in
Spokane by
Spokane.
then. I know on the 14th that Director Weaver and I have agenda planning from 10 to 11. I'm available from 11 to 12 if we just want to continue,
I can do that.
unless Director Mullings would like to be involved.
Unless someone
I mean-
else desperately wants to
Right.
do it.
I only free up, I'm not free on the 14th, I'm free on the 15th, later in the day, so. The 2:30.
See, and I'd rather just get it done with on the 14th
Okay,
if I have to do it
I could do the
on.
2. Yeah.
So unless you're dying to do it, no.
Yeah,
Okay,
the 16th doesn't work for anybody.
it doesn't work at all. So it sounds like Suzanne and I could do it on the 14th at 11. Okay, Director Mullings? Okay, we'll just take care of it since we're already there. All right. Then, all right, I made a note. And then now we need to do some calendaring around our December 8th board meeting. We're going to move the start of that until the regular meeting until 7 p.m. So that affords Director Mullings the opportunity to participate in the Black elected leaders, not committee, caucus, no.
Forum.
Forum,
Of
forum,
Washington.
we'll give it that. So that's what our first motion's about. So I'll
Just gonna make it
let you
whatever
go with
it is
that.
each time we
I
do
know,
this.
every time
Yeah.
we rename it.
Yeah. Okay, I move the board. Am I on? Yeah. I move the board, move the start time of the December 8th, 2022 board meeting from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor of moving the start time of the December 8th meeting till 7 p.m., say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, and so I don't know if you need to note that there are only 4 of us voting, but it's still unanimously passed. All right, now, because we have separated the regular meeting from what is normally our work study time where we're planning an exec session, we have to move for a special meeting because they're no longer attached to each other. So now if we have a motion related to that.
I move the board hold a special meeting on December 8th, 2022 at the Administration Service Center from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. for an executive session in accordance with RCW 42.30.110 parenthesis 1 parenthesis I, potential legal matters.
Second.
All right, all those in favor of adoption of the special meeting, say aye.
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 Okay, opposed? All right, that one unanimously passes. And then lastly, we need a motion. At the last meeting, we had established we would do a retreat work session on February 10th from 9 to 5. Oh, and on March 1st do you have a time written there?
It says from 8 to 12.
Okay,
Is that
it
right?
got cut off on mine. Yeah, 8 to 12.
Okay.
And so we haven't seen any issues with those times when we went and looked. And so now we need the motion to actually calendar it.
Oh, because that's a CIP day. Okay. I
Yes,
forgot about that.
that's why we're doing it from 8
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah.
12 and then at 12:30
Coming
we
back
go
to me
into
now.
the SIP. Okay,
I move the board hold a work session retreat at the Administration Service Center on February 10th, 2023 from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and on March 1st, 2023 from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m.
Second.
All right, all those in favor of the scheduling of our retreat work session, say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, those pass. We have two things. We can either attempt to schedule our town hall. So, so this last one we did at Maywood, do we want to target someplace in the middle, like PCM? We'll do it here, or I was going to say PCMS, something that kind of keeps us in the middle.
As much as I've hated this, I can't even say this is, I think we should try a hybrid one. Just
A hybrid?
see, like, I resisted all before. I think we're in a spot where I think we could at least try it.
So we could
This is the only place where we could easily do
right.
it. Like where I know
They
we have the
have people on
technology
both.
to do it.
Yeah, I wasn't at the last one. I know it was a small group, so it was probably super easy to manage. Again, yeah, if the room isn't overflowing with people in person, then it gives you more ability to do both in person and hybrid. Thoughts on the rest of the board?
Otherwise, I would say it should be somewhere in the corridor, like Cougar Mountain.
Do we need to talk a little bit about how a hybrid would work?
Oh, well, that's Stephen. I like that. Oh, well, you mean as far as,
I mean, would it be a Zoom?
yes,
Mhm.
yeah, we'd have people on Zoom.
work like
We'd
a
have to be able to
It would
let
function
people
just-
cycle through.
Like a board.
Well, I mean, on the one hand, they could just watch and participate and
Uh-huh.
like the original one where you had Menti, the questions. Well, I guess maybe actually people did ask the questions. If the questions come straight out of the Menti, then you don't necessarily need as much interaction with the people in the Zoom. I don't know how you did
Correct,
this
yeah.
last one.
Right, and that's what I mean. We would use Menti to integrate in. That would be seamless for whether you're at home or here.
So you're saying that unlike the first one we did, the people on the Zoom would be able to.
Oh,
manage it.
yes.
Right,
Because the
Oh, yeah.
first one we said they could.
right, correct.
Right. Oh, no,
Because
they have to.
We
Okay, well, that's what I
it
thought.
was just too much for us to get started when we were only
Yeah.
a couple years into this.
Just clarify.
I think now we're in a space where we can do this.
Right.
So I think it's worth a shot to try it, but I wouldn't want to try it in any building except this room.
Right. To do it.
So that's all versus, when we get really good at, we'll be able to do it from any building.
What do you think? So really the people on
Seems like-
Zoom, their participation and even the people in the room, their participation is really through the Menti and then listening to the
To our question, right? Because that's all they want to hear is
answers.
they want to hear like they ask a question and we actually answer it
Right.
rather than say like, thank you for your input.
Right. And I totally get that. But the questions are coming straight out of Menti versus being voiced by the people, because that's where I think it would start to get challenging on
Well, it could be the
pull through the
people,
Zoom people.
the people in the room we could have them.
They
wait.
could.
We'll have to see what the mix is
Yeah,
when
right.
we start and I'm fine to make game
Adjustments.
day
Well,
adjustments as needed. So I think it's worth a try.
Yeah.
I'm just offering it. If we don't want to do that, then let's
Yeah.
do Cougar Mountain or something. But I
Right.
think we do need to be in the corridor.
corridor. Yeah, I was suggesting PCMS because that's also sort of in the corridor. But Director Moraldo.
So I think if we did have it here, because one of the difficulties about why we didn't the last time, why they weren't involved in the Menti is there was no way for them to ask their question
Yeah.
because there was no way for us to get sound from the Zoom call back into the rest of the room. Here we have that capability as we've seen today. We
Yeah.
can call on somebody who's on the Zoom so they can still ask their question. And that wasn't possible, like you said, in any other building for us to really be able to tap in and do that. So I think I would be fine having it here, especially if we're going to do it during some of the winter months where some people may not be able to travel as well.
Mhm.
And yeah, and with rain, they may not want to go out on a dark and stormy night.
Okay.
I like the idea of hybrid. I like it in this room. I think Menti makes it all work, so I'm on board.
Okay. Now we need a date. So how far out do we have to schedule?
I say we just go straight to the doodle.
We can, but sometimes let's give it a couple minutes if we can come up with it. Sometimes it starts with how far out you're scheduling, Director Gallinger. So can we do it in near to where we already have a school board meeting? So either the week of that has our 12th or the 26th meeting?
Is that still allow time?
Yes. Yeah, I'm not going to be available the off week. Yeah. So I was wondering like the 25th. January 25th. And Diane?
I'll be at the NSBA Advocacy Institute, and I think Harlan's probably planning on coming that same.
That's in that.
Oh, you know what? I have to be there because I'm on the board. Yes, thank you.
What about the 11th? You said
Right. January, what about January 11th?
What about 11?
Hey, you too, pay
focus.
attention.
January 11th?
I have an influence of choice board meeting that typically ends around 7. So if we did 7:30, I could do that. But I wouldn't be able to come earlier.
7.
Or do you want to try one of the Tuesdays? Are Tuesdays better? The 10th or the
Tuesday, the 10th
24th?
would work, not the 24th.
Tuesday, the 10th?
I'm a yes.
Arlen is nodding. Sydney is scrolling. Sydney is scrolling.
I think that could work.
Okay.
Oh, my
Good
gosh.
for me.
So everybody put, and Diane, does that work for?
Oh, yes, yes, that works for me.
Probably chit chat.
I would, I didn't know if you actually wanted to hear from Stephen at all on the operability and what, how that might change facilitation or design of that time. But if you,
Sure.
he did raise his voice
He
and then
did.
you all acknowledged it, but
It'd be like,
when we're ready to, I think you more. Okay,
Right,
got it.
right.
Here, I just want to double
Okay.
check.
right,
Yeah.
this side's
Yes,
fine, because
yes.
it's
I
like
know.
I
a
just wanted to
school board
double check.
meeting.
Because it's just like a meeting.
But it requires some prep and run through. So
wanna go
what I
anywhere
found,
else.
what I found is that Stephen will want to do prep and run through to make sure we have the tools to support how you want to engage.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
I'll come 15 minutes early to do all the checks and get it all loaded.
Yeah, wow.
15?
Okay,
Really?
Luxury.
so Diane, did you see anything wrong with that date? Not yet. Okay, so you guys, Diane's gonna send out a hold for January 10th at 7 PM. And then we'll calendar it. Why don't we just calendar it the next one? Let's just give everybody a chance to look at it. She'll send out the hold. And then we'll deal with it at that meeting. Because when we do these on the fly, everybody needs a moment to maybe see if this is really working. All right. All right, that's the end of those things. And then since we amended our agenda to go into exec session, I've now been told we need a specific motion about that. And so I gave Director Weaver the motion.
I move the board move into an executive session to review the performance of an employee pursuant to RCW 42.30.110G for 15 minutes.
Second,
All right, all those in favor of the move into executive session, say aye.
aye.
Opposed? All right, and that was our last item of business, and now we adjourn.